Welcome, fellow wanderer of the endless seas, to the extraordinary chronicle of one whose blade would carve legend into the very fabric of pirate history. Tonight, we trace the complete journey of Roronoa Zoro, from a determined child bound by an impossible promise to the man who would stand beside the future pirate king as his most trusted guardian. This is a tale of unwavering loyalty forged in the crucible of countless battles, written in the language of steel and sacrifice. So settle in, let the gentle rhythm of ocean waves carry you into peaceful slumber as we explore every triumph, every defeat, and every moment that transformed a village swordsman into the king of hell himself. In the quiet village of Shimotsuki, nestled in the east blue where morning mist clung to rolling hills like memories refusing to fade, destiny began its work on a child who would one day shake the very foundations of the swordsmanship world. 21 years ago, Roronoa Zoro entered existence not with the fanfare that might befit a future legend, but with the simple cry of any newborn, in a place where time moved with the rhythm of training sessions and the whisper of steel against steel. His earliest years were marked by loss so profound that it might have crushed a lesser spirit, yet somehow only served to forge his will into something approaching the hardness of the blades he would one day master. By the time Zoro reached his 8th year, both parents had been claimed by the cruel mathematics of a pirate's world, his father falling in battle against raiders who threatened their peaceful village, his mother succumbing to illness that no amount of determination could overcome. The boy who remained was not bitter, not broken, but rather focused with an intensity that seemed to burn away everything except the single-minded pursuit of strength. The Ishin Dojo became his refuge and his crucible, a place where Master Kushiru taught lessons that went far deeper than the mere mechanics of swordplay. The elderly sensei possessed wisdom accumulated through decades of training warriors, understanding that true strength came not from the blade, but from the heart that guided it. Yet, even as he imparted these philosophical foundations, Kushiru could sense something different about the green-haired boy who threw himself into training with fervor that bordered on obsession. It was in this dojo that Zoro first encountered the person who would define the trajectory of his entire existence, though neither child could have understood the weight of that first meeting. Kuina moved through sword forms with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her technique polished to a degree that made seasoned adults appear clumsy by comparison. She was everything Zoro aspired to become: swift, precise, utterly confident in her mastery of the blade, and she was only 1 year his senior. Their first duel was less a fight than a lesson in humility, Kuina's wooden sword finding its mark, while Zoro's wild swings met nothing but air. The defeat stung, but not as much as the casual dismissal in her eyes, the way she seemed to look through him rather than at him. For most children, such overwhelming superiority might have inspired surrender. For Zoro, it ignited a fire that would burn for the rest of his life. The challenges that followed became the defining rhythm of his childhood, each day bringing another opportunity to test his growing skills against someone who remained frustratingly, impossibly superior. 2001 times they crossed wooden blades, and 2001 times Kuina emerged victorious. Each loss carved lessons into his muscle memory, taught him new ways to approach seemingly insurmountable obstacles, demonstrated that improvement was always possible, even when victory remained elusive. The other students whispered about Zoro's stubborn refusal to accept reality, his inability to understand that some gaps could not be bridged through effort alone. They failed to recognize that his defeats were not failures but investments, each loss teaching him something that future victories would require. While they saw futility, Zoro saw progress measured in smaller margins of defeat, in moments where his blade came close to connecting, in the gradually increasing respect he could detect in Kuina's eyes. Master Kushiru watched these daily battles with interest that transcended mere pedagogical concern, recognizing in both children the kind of dedication that could reshape the world if properly channeled. His lessons to Zoro often came in the form of philosophical discussions that seemed to have little connection to swordplay, talks about the nature of strength and the responsibility that came with power. The old master spoke of legendary swordsmen who could cut through anything, yet who understood that true mastery lay in knowing what should be cut and what should be protected. It was during one of these conversations that Kushiro demonstrated a technique that would haunt Zoro's understanding for years to come. Taking a piece of paper, the master drew his blade and cut through it with such precision that the two halves remained perfectly aligned, appearing uncut until the slightest disturbance caused them to separate. When Zoro attempted to replicate the feat, his crude efforts either left the paper whole or reduced it to ribbons, the middle ground of perfect control remaining beyond his grasp. The lesson was about more than technique, though Zoro would not fully comprehend this until much later. Kushiro spoke of swords that could sense the will of their wielders, of blades that became extensions of their master's intent, rather than mere tools for destruction. A truly great swordsman, he explained, could cut through steel when necessary while leaving a leaf unharmed when such gentleness served his purpose. The sword that cut everything was not strong, but rather lacked the discrimination that separated masters from mere wielders of sharp metal. Zoro listened to these teachings with the intensity of someone absorbing sacred text, filing away every word for future contemplation, even as he continued to focus primarily on the immediate goal of finally defeating Kuina. His training regimen became legendary among the dojo's students, sessions that stretched from dawn until well past sunset, exercises performed with weights that would have challenged grown men. Where other children found time for games and rest, Zoro discovered new ways to push his body beyond its previous limitations. The breakthrough never came during their official matches, those formal encounters where technique and form were expected to prevail. Instead, it was during their 2000th and first duel, fought in the darkness of night with real swords rather than wooden practice blades, that Zoro finally glimpsed the summit he had been climbing toward for so long. The weight of steel in his hands felt different than wood, more honest somehow, carrying implications that training weapons could never convey. Even as his skills improved dramatically, even as his strikes began to carry the force and precision that marked a true swordsman in the making, Kuina remained just beyond his reach. Her own growth seemed to match his, as if she were a moving target that adjusted to ensure he could approach but never quite touch her level of mastery. The frustration of this endless pursuit might have broken someone with lesser determination, but for Zoro it only confirmed that she was worthy of being his ultimate goal. It was after this climactic battle, as both children sat exhausted in the dojo's courtyard with the taste of defeat and determination equally bitter in his mouth, that their relationship transcended mere rivalry to become something approaching friendship. Kuina's revelation of her deepest fears came like a sword thrust to an unguarded heart, her confession that she would never be allowed to reach her full potential because of society's expectations for women carrying weight that he had never considered. The bitter irony of their situation became clear in that moment of honesty. Zoro, who lost every battle between them, was destined to grow stronger simply by virtue of his gender, while Kuina, who had never known defeat at his hands, faced artificial limitations that no amount of skill could overcome. Her father's words about women's fighting potential echoed in the night air like a curse, the prophecy that her body's maturation would steal away the advantages that made her invincible. Zoro's response to this revelation revealed the depths of his character, the fundamental decency that would later make him worthy of standing beside the future Pirate King. Rather than feeling relieved or vindicated by the suggestion that his eventual victory was inevitable, he grew angry at the unfairness of it all. His promise to defeat her through superior skill rather than biological advantage was more than mere bravado. It was a declaration that their rivalry transcended the petty limitations that society tried to impose on their dreams. Their shared promise, made under stars that seemed to shine with unusual brightness that night, bound them together in ways that neither fully understood at the time. One of them would become the world's greatest swordsman, carrying the dreams of both toward a summit that suddenly seemed not just possible but inevitable. The competition that had defined their relationship transformed into collaboration, two spirits united in pursuit of the same impossible goal. The tragedy that followed came without warning, as death often does in a world where even the simplest activities can turn fatal in an instant. Queena's fall down the dojo stairs was the kind of mundane accident that makes mockery of all human ambition, reducing a prodigy capable of reshaping the swordsmanship world to a victim of gravity and misfortune. The girl who had never been defeated by any opponent was conquered by a flight of wooden steps, her dreams ending not in glorious battle, but in the most ordinary tragedy imaginable. Zoro's grief was immediate and overwhelming, but it was his anger that would prove more significant in shaping what came after. The raw injustice of losing someone so gifted to something so meaningless ignited a fury that would burn for years, transforming his pursuit of strength from personal ambition into sacred mission. If the world was cruel enough to steal away the most deserving candidate for greatness, then he would claim that greatness himself and hold it in trust for both their memories. The request for Wado Ichimonji represented more than acquiring a superior weapon to tame. It was accepting the weight of carrying two dreams toward a single destination. Kushiero's agreement to part with his daughter's sword carried implications that went beyond mere sentiment. The old master, recognizing that the blade had found someone worthy of wielding it toward the goal, Quina could no longer pursue herself. The white-wrapped katana became not just a tool but a constant reminder of promises made and debts owed to the dead. The development of three-sword style emerged from necessity rather than mere innovation. Zoro's recognition that achieving the impossible would require approaches that no one had ever attempted before. Holding two swords in his hands felt natural enough, but the addition of a third blade clenched between his teeth transformed him into something unprecedented, a warrior whose very fighting stance announced his refusal to accept conventional limitations. Each sword would carry part of the burden. Each blade would honor a different aspect of the dream he now carried alone. The philosophical implications of his unique style went deeper than its tactical advantages, though those were considerable. By literally holding Quina's sword in his mouth, Zoro made his fighting technique into a constant act of remembrance, every battle becoming a conversation with the friend he had lost. The awkwardness of the initial attempts, the months of training required to coordinate three separate weapons, served as physical manifestation of the difficulty inherent in carrying someone else's dreams alongside your own. The villagers of Shimotsuki watched Zoro's transformation with mixture of admiration and concern, recognizing that the boy who had once been driven by healthy competition had become someone consumed by purpose that bordered on obsession. His training sessions grew longer and more intense, his dedication to improvement taking on qualities that seemed almost religious in their fervor. Where other teenagers might have begun to show interest in pursuits beyond martial arts, Zoro demonstrated only deepening commitment to the path he had chosen. The decision to leave the village came not from restlessness or wanderlust, but from clear-eyed recognition that further growth required challenges that Shimotsuki could not provide. Master Kushiro's teachings had provided the foundation upon which everything else would be built, but the structure of his dreams demanded materials that could only be found in the wider world. The greatest swordsman would not emerge from comfortable familiarity, but from the crucible of constant testing against unknown opponents. The farewell with Kushiro carried weight that neither master nor student fully articulated, though both understood that they were unlikely to meet again. The old swordsman had given Zoro everything he could: technical knowledge, philosophical framework, and most importantly, the example of someone who had achieved mastery while maintaining his humanity. What remained could only be learned through experience that no teacher could provide. Lessons that had to be carved into flesh and bone through direct confrontation with the world's dangers. The name that had begun to circulate in whispers would soon echo across the seas: Dracul Mihawk, the man who currently held the title that Zoro intended to claim. But the path to that confrontation would prove longer and more complex than the green-haired swordsman could have imagined, winding through adventures and alliances that would test more than just his skill with a blade. The boy leaving Shimotsuki carried with him not just weapons and technique, but the accumulated weight of promises made to the living and the dead, debts that could only be repaid through achievements that the world had never witnessed before. As his small boat disappeared beyond the horizon that had once seemed so distant, Zoro carried with him the echo of wooden swords clacking in an empty dojo, the memory of a girl whose laughter had made even defeat feel like victory, and the unshakable conviction that some dreams were worth any sacrifice required to achieve them. The greatest swordsman in the world was still a distant goal, but the journey toward that summit had finally begun in earnest, each stroke of the oars carrying him closer to a destiny that would honor both the promise made to a friend and the legacy of a village that had given him everything he needed to pursue the impossible. The world beyond Shimotsuki village spread before Roronoa Zoro like an ocean of infinite possibility. Each island a potential stepping stone toward the destiny he had claimed as his inheritance from a fallen friend. Yet the reality of his quest proved far more complex than the simple determination that had carried him away from everything familiar, the vast expanse of the East Blue offering challenges that no amount of dojo training could have prepared him to face. The first and most humbling of these challenges was navigation itself, or rather his complete and utter inability to comprehend it despite possessing what he believed to be adequate intelligence in other areas. The small boat that had seemed perfectly sufficient for reaching the next island became a prison when every direction looked identical, when the sun's position provided guidance that somehow led him in circles, when the very concept of maintaining a straight course proved as elusive as the legendary swordsman he sought to challenge. Within days of leaving his village, Zoro found himself hopelessly lost in waters that should have been familiar, his confident departure transforming into a humbling lesson about the difference between possessing a goal and possessing the means to achieve it. The irony was not lost on him that someone who could precisely control 3 swords simultaneously could not manage to control a single boat's direction, that hands capable of the most delicate blade work failed completely when tasked with basic seamanship. Hunger became his first true enemy on the open sea, more immediate and demanding than any human opponent he had ever faced. The provisions he had packed with such confidence lasted mere days, his appetite amplified by the constant physical effort of rowing, combined with the stress of being perpetually lost. The fish that swam beneath his boat might as well have been swimming in another ocean for all the success his early attempts at catching them achieved. His swords proving magnificently unsuited for the patient art of angling. It was during these desperate early days that Zoro first encountered the harsh mathematics of survival, the recognition that strength meant nothing without the resources to sustain it. The muscles he had built through years of training required fuel that the sea did not provide freely. The endurance he had cultivated through countless practice sessions proving worthless when basic nutrition became scarce. For someone who had always taken the simple act of eating for granted, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach became a constant reminder of how much he still had to learn about existing in the world beyond dojo walls. The solution, when it finally presented itself, came not through planning or wisdom, but through the desperate pragmatism of someone with no alternatives remaining. A wanted poster glimpsed on a dock where he had managed to beach his boat showed a face he recognized, not personally, but as the type of person whose capture might fund the next stage of his journey. The bounty amount seemed impossibly large to someone who had never possessed significant money, representing weeks or even months of meals and supplies. The transition from swordsman to bounty hunter felt less like career change than natural evolution, his skills with a blade finally finding practical application. In a world where strength could be converted into the currency necessary for survival. The pirates who plagued the East Blue's shipping lanes became his prey, each successful capture providing the resources needed to continue his search for greater challenges, while simultaneously building a reputation that would eventually attract the attention he sought. His first bounty proved almost laughably easy to claim, the target so confident in his reputation that he never considered the possibility of being hunted by someone who looked like a lost teenager with an unusual sword arrangement. The fight lasted less than a minute, 3 perfectly coordinated slashes ending the pirate's career while providing Zoro with enough money to properly outfit his boat and stock provisions for extended voyages. The ease of victory left him with mixed feelings, satisfaction at finally earning something through his swordsmanship, but disappointment that such fearsome reputations could be built on such limited actual ability. The pattern that emerged over the following months established the rhythm that would define his life for years to come. Research would identify targets whose bounties made them worth pursuing. Investigation would reveal their locations and habits. Confrontation would test his skills against opponents who fought for their freedom rather than mere practice. And victory would provide the resources needed to continue the cycle. Each successful hunt built his reputation while funding his ongoing search for the legendary Mihawk, creating a feedback loop that drew increasingly dangerous prey while providing increasingly valuable rewards. Yet the loneliness of this existence began to weigh on him in ways he had not anticipated. The absence of daily interaction with training partners and fellow students, creating an isolation that no amount of money could address. Conversations were limited to brief exchanges with dock workers and innkeepers. Relationships measured in transactions rather than genuine human connection. The villagers of Shimotsuki had been his community, even when they did not fully understand his obsession with swordplay, their presence providing context and meaning for his efforts that the wider world seemed reluctant to offer. It was during this period of increasing isolation that Zoro encountered the 2 men who would become his closest friends during the wandering years. A meeting that occurred through the kind of coincidence that suggested fate had not entirely abandoned him to solitude. Johnny and Yosaku possessed neither exceptional skill nor impressive reputations, but they offered something far more valuable to someone who had been living entirely within his own head. Companionship from people who understood what it meant to make their living through the application of violence to those who deserved it. The 3 bounty hunters formed an unlikely partnership, their combined skills and resources allowing them to pursue targets that would have been impossible for any single individual to handle safely. Johnny's knowledge of the East Blue's geography provided the navigation skills that Zoro so desperately lacked, while Yosaku's connections among information brokers gave them access to intelligence about lucrative opportunities before other hunters learned of them. In return, Zoro's swordsmanship provided the combat effectiveness that allowed them to pursue bounties that other teams would not dare to attempt. Their friendship developed slowly, built on shared dangers and mutual dependence rather than the instant connection that sometimes occurs between kindred spirits. Johnny and Yosaku initially viewed Zoro with mixture of respect and wariness, recognizing his superior abilities while remaining uncertain about his ultimate intentions toward them. For his part, Zoro found their company pleasant enough, but maintained the emotional distance that had become his default response to most human relationships, unwilling to risk the kind of loss he had experienced with Quina. The breakthrough in their relationship came during a hunt that went disastrously wrong, their target proving far more capable than intelligence had suggested, while backup arrived at precisely the worst possible moment. Surrounded and outnumbered, facing opponents whose combined strength exceeded their ability to handle, the three hunters found themselves fighting not for money, but for survival. It was in this moment of genuine peril that their partnership transformed into something approaching brotherhood, each man willing to risk his life to protect the others without calculation or hesitation. Zoro's display of his true capabilities during that battle marked the end of any pretense about the relative contributions each member made to their team's success. His mastery of three-sword style, revealed fully for the first time to his companions, demonstrated levels of skill that belonged in legends rather than the practical world of East Blue bounty hunting. Yet rather than creating resentment or jealousy, this revelation seemed to deepen Johnny and Yosaku's loyalty, their recognition that someone of his abilities had chosen to include them in his quest, creating bonds of gratitude that would endure for years to come. The reputation that began to spread through the East Blue's underground networks carried implications that extended far beyond simple recognition of his combat abilities. Pirate Hunter Zoro became a name whispered with respect in taverns where bounty hunters gathered, spoken with fear in hideouts where pirates planned their crimes, and noted with interest in marine bases where officers tracked the activities of freelance law enforcement. His success rate in capturing wanted criminals approached perfection, his methods leaving targets alive but thoroughly subdued, his growing legend attracting attention from increasingly powerful organizations. It was this burgeoning reputation that eventually brought him to the notice of Baroque Works, the mysterious criminal organization whose reach extended throughout the Grand Line and whose recruitment methods relied more on reputation than personal interviews. The offer, when it finally came, arrived through intermediaries who made it clear that refusal was not an option most people survived. The organization's standard operating procedure, involving the elimination of those who possessed knowledge they preferred to keep secret. The meeting itself took place in a location chosen to emphasize the organization's power and reach, an abandoned warehouse where shadows provided concealment for guards whose presence could be felt even when they could not be seen. The agent who made the recruitment pitch, later revealed to be Mr. Seven, possessed the kind of casual confidence that came from representing an organization that had never been successfully defied. His offer framed less as invitation than as inevitable destiny. The position offered was significant within Baroque Works' hierarchy, a numbered agent rank that would have provided resources and opportunities far beyond anything available to a freelance bounty hunter operating in the East Blue. The organization's reach into the Grand Line promised access to opponents whose strength would provide the challenges necessary for continued growth, while their intelligence networks offered the possibility of finally locating the elusive Mihawk. For someone whose ultimate goal required constant testing against increasingly powerful adversaries, the opportunity seemed almost too perfect to refuse. Yet Zoro's response revealed the fundamental aspect of his character that would later make him worthy of serving as the right hand to the future Pirate King. His absolute refusal to subordinate himself to anyone whose goals did not align with his own moral compass. His counter-offer to join only if he could lead the organization was not mere arrogance but a statement of principle. His recognition that true strength could not be achieved through service to masters whose methods he could not respect. The organization that required its members to operate under false names and in shadows was not one that someone seeking to become the world's greatest swordsman could honorably serve. The confrontation that followed was brief but definitive. Mr. Seven's attempt to enforce the organization's will through violence, meeting the harsh reality of facing someone whose skills had been honed through years of life or death encounters. The agent's death served as Zoro's formal rejection of Baroque Works' offer, a message that would eventually reach the organization's leadership and mark him as a person of interest, whose activities would be monitored for potential future recruitment or elimination. The incident also marked a turning point in Zoro's understanding of his place in the world's power structures, his recognition that strength attracted attention from forces that operated according to rules, very different from the straightforward morality he had learned in Shimotsuki village. The Grand Line contained organizations and individuals whose power dwarfed anything he had encountered in the East Blue, whose methods and goals would test not just his swordsmanship, but his fundamental beliefs about right and wrong. The philosophical questions raised by the Baroque Works encounter began to influence his approach to the bounty hunting profession. His growing awareness that not all wanted criminals deserved capture, that not all bounties were issued by legitimate authorities, that the simple equation of legal equals right was far more complex than he had previously understood. The research that had once focused purely on combat capabilities and reward amounts expanded to include investigation of the crimes that had generated the bounties. His moral compass, refusing to allow him to profit from what amounted to political persecution or personal vendettas. This evolution in his thinking created new challenges for his partnership with Johnny and Yosaku, men whose approach to their profession remained grounded in the practical considerations of survival and profit rather than the increasingly complex ethical framework that Zoro was developing. Their discussions around campfires began to include debates about which targets were worthy of pursuit, conversations that revealed growing philosophical differences while somehow strengthening rather than weakening their friendship. The legend of pirate hunter Zoro continued to grow throughout the East Blue, his reputation eventually reaching levels that made him a topic of conversation even among Marines who had never operated in waters where he was active. Stories of his three-sword style spread and evolved in the telling, each retelling adding details that transformed his actual techniques into something approaching mythology. The swordsman who could defeat entire crews single-handedly, whose blades moved too fast for normal eyes to follow, whose mere presence was enough to make seasoned criminals surrender without fighting, became a figure that seemed to exist more in legend than in reality. Yet the man behind the legend remained focused on the simple goal that had driven him from his village, his daily existence, shaped by the ongoing search for challenges that would prepare him for the eventual confrontation with Mihawk, that would determine whether he was worthy of claiming the title he sought. Each successful hunt was evaluated not in terms of the money it provided, but in terms of the lessons it taught, the skills it developed, the weaknesses it revealed that would need to be addressed before facing an opponent whose reputation made all of his previous victories seem like warm-up exercises. The isolation that had marked his early months as a bounty hunter gradually gave way to something approaching contentment, his friendship with Johnny and Yosaku, providing the human connection necessary to maintain his sanity, while his growing reputation attracted increasingly challenging targets. The wandering years had transformed the grief-stricken boy who had left Shimotsuki village into something approaching the warrior he needed to become. each month adding layers of experience and wisdom to the foundation of skill and determination that had always defined his character. Yet somewhere deep within his consciousness, Zoro remained aware that this existence, satisfying though it had become, was merely preparation for something greater. The true test of his growth would come not from defeating more bounties or building a larger reputation, but from the inevitable moment when his path would intersect with someone whose dreams burned with the same intensity as his own, whose needs would prove more important than his carefully constructed independence, whose goals would provide the context that would transform his individual quest into something approaching destiny. The East Blue continued to provide challenges and opportunities, but increasingly Zoro found himself looking toward horizons that lay beyond its familiar boundaries, sensing that the next phase of his journey would require him to venture into waters where the rules he had learned would prove inadequate, where the strength he had built would be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. The wandering years had served their purpose, but their end was approaching, and with it would come changes that would reshape not just his individual quest, but his understanding of what it truly meant to pursue the impossible dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. The threads of destiny began to weave themselves together on a sun-scorched morning in Shellstown, where the corrupt machinery of justice had transformed what should have been a sanctuary of law into a monument to personal tyranny. The marine base that crowned the town's highest hill cast shadows that seemed to reach into every corner of daily life, its presence serving as constant reminder that power without wisdom inevitably became indistinguishable from oppression. Yet it was in this place of institutional failure that fate would arrange the meeting between two souls whose dreams would prove large enough to reshape the world itself. Roronoa Zoro's arrival in Shellstown had been entirely accidental, the latest consequence of his legendary inability to navigate even the simplest sea routes despite possessing skills that made him legendary among those who tracked the movements of East Blue's most dangerous criminals. His reputation as pirate hunter Zoro had grown to proportions that made his name whispered with equal measures of fear and respect throughout the region's criminal underground. Yet none of this fearsome celebrity could help him find his way from one island to another without becoming hopelessly lost in waters that should have been familiar. The incident that led to his capture began with what should have been a simple act of heroism, the kind of instinctive response to injustice that had always defined his character, even when such interventions complicated his professional objectives. Helmeppo, the spoiled son of corrupt Marine Captain Axehand Morgan, had unleashed his pet wolf in the town's market square as a demonstration of the impunity that his father's position provided. The beasts rampaged through crowded stalls, serving as both entertainment and reminder of who held real power in Shellstown. The attack on Little Rika should have been just another casualty in the casual cruelty that marked daily life under Morgan's rule, one more innocent victim whose suffering would be forgotten as soon as the immediate entertainment value had been exhausted. But Zoro's intervention transformed what should have been a minor tragedy into the catalyst for events that would echo across the seas for years to come. His sword stroke, executed with precision that left the wolf dead before it could complete its lunge toward the terrified child, announced the presence of someone whose skills operated on an entirely different level than anything Shellstown had previously witnessed. The confrontation with Helmeppo that followed revealed the depths of corruption that had infected the town's power structure. The young man's outraged response to having his entertainment interrupted, demonstrating the kind of casual sadism that flourished when authority faced no meaningful opposition. His demand that Zoro submit to binding as punishment for interfering with his amusement carried the implicit threat of escalation that had cowed the town's residents into submission, the understanding that resistance would bring consequences far worse than simple compliance. Yet Zoro's agreement to Helmeppo's terms revealed the complexity of his moral calculations, his recognition that sometimes apparent surrender served greater purposes than meaningless resistance. The deal offered was simple enough on its surface: allow himself to be tied to a post in the marine courtyard for 1 month, surviving on whatever water the guards chose to provide, and his interference with the wolf would be forgiven. But the subtext was clear to anyone who understood the power dynamics at work. This was less punishment than public execution disguised as mercy, a slow death designed to demonstrate what happened to those who challenged the established order. The decision to accept these terms was not born of naivety or miscalculation, but rather from Zoro's clear-eyed assessment of his situation and his unwillingness to escalate a confrontation that would inevitably result in innocent casualties. His reputation as pirate hunter Zoro was built on his ability to evaluate opponents and situations with precision that rarely led him astray, and his analysis of Shellstown's political structure told him that open rebellion would bring Morgan's full military might down on a population that had no means of protecting itself from such retaliation. The days that followed his binding tested not just his physical endurance, but his psychological resilience, the marine courtyard becoming a stage where his suffering served as daily reminder to the town's residents of the price paid by those who dared to act according to their conscience rather than their fear. The post where he was tied offered no shelter from the elements, no relief from the sun's burning heat during the day or the chill that settled over the island each night. No comfort beyond the knowledge that his sacrifice had prevented greater tragedies from befalling people who had shown him nothing but kindness. The hunger that gnawed at him with increasing intensity as the days passed became a familiar companion. His body's demands for sustenance ignored in favor of the mental discipline that had been forged through years of training under conditions that had prepared him for exactly this kind of ordeal. The water provided by the guards was barely sufficient to prevent death by dehydration. Each carefully rationed sip, a reminder of how completely his freedom had been stripped away. Yet none of this physical discomfort could touch the core of determination that had sustained him through every challenge he had faced since leaving Shimotsuki village. It was during his 9th day of captivity that the arrival of 2 strangers in Shellstown began the sequence of events that would transform his individual quest into something far greater than he had ever imagined possible. The small boat that approached the harbor carried passengers whose presence would prove more significant than their humble appearance suggested. A young man whose straw hat seemed to capture and hold sunlight like a beacon, and a pink-haired boy whose nervous energy marked him as someone still adjusting to life on the sea. Monkey D. Luffy's first glimpse of the bound swordsman created an impression that would influence every subsequent interaction between them. The sight of someone who could endure such treatment without breaking, striking something deep within the straw hat wearer's understanding of what true strength actually meant. The casual way Zoro bore his suffering, the absence of complaint or self-pity despite circumstances that would have crushed most people's spirits, spoke to qualities that went far beyond mere physical toughness to encompass the kind of moral courage that Luffy instinctively recognized and respected. The conversation that developed between them revealed the fundamental compatibility of their worldviews, though neither fully understood the significance of what was being established in those first tentative exchanges. Luffy's straightforward approach to complex problems resonated with Zoro's own preference for direct action over political maneuvering, while the swordsman's unwavering commitment to his goals provided the kind of reliability that someone planning to become Pirate King would desperately need in the trials that lay ahead. Kobe's presence as witness to their meeting added layers of complexity that neither Luffy nor Zoro immediately grasped. The young marine recruit's horrified fascination with the power dynamics at work in Shellstown, providing an outside perspective on what had become normalized within the town's daily life. His explanations of Morgan's rise to power and the methods used to maintain control filled in details that helped both newcomers understand the full scope of the corruption they had stumbled into. The revelation that an entire marine base had been transformed into the personal kingdom of one man's megalomaniacal ambitions. The test that would determine whether Zoro was worthy of joining Luffy's as-yet non-existent crew came not through combat or formal evaluation, but through the simple act of sharing food with someone who had shown him kindness. Little Rika's attempt to bring rice balls to the starving swordsman represented the kind of innocent generosity that both men instinctively valued, her willingness to risk punishment in order to ease someone else's suffering, embodying principles that neither could ignore without betraying their own moral foundations. Helmeppo's intervention transformed what should have been a moment of simple human kindness into a demonstration of the casual cruelty that had become standard operating procedure under his father's rule. His destruction of the rice balls, his mocking dismissal of the child's tears, his obvious enjoyment of the power to inflict suffering without consequence, revealed the depths of moral bankruptcy that unlimited authority could create in those who lacked the character to wield it responsibly. Zoro's response to this display provided Luffy with crucial insight into the kind of person he was considering as his first crew member. The swordsman's request that the destroyed food be fed to him, despite its condition, demonstrating both pragmatic acceptance of his situation and genuine appreciation for the gesture that had inspired its creation. His public declaration that the rice balls had been delicious, delivered loud enough for Rika to hear despite Helmeppo's attempts to humiliate her, showed the kind of consideration for others' feelings that marked him as someone whose strength served purposes greater than mere self-interest. The decision that crystallized in Luffy's mind during that moment would reshape both their destinies. His recognition that someone capable of such grace under impossible circumstances was exactly the kind of person he wanted beside him as he pursued his own impossible dream. The invitation he extended was characteristically direct and free of the elaborate justifications that most people would have required. His simple declaration that he wanted Zoro as his crew member carrying implications that neither fully understood at the time. Zoro's initial rejection of the offer stemmed not from lack of interest, but from practical considerations that spoke to his understanding of what accepting would mean for his individual quest. His goal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman had shaped every decision he had made since leaving his village, the single-minded pursuit of that dream, requiring a focus that seemed incompatible with the obligations that would come with crew membership. The reputation he had built as pirate hunter Zoro carried its own momentum and value, providing both the resources necessary for his continued development and the recognition that would eventually attract the attention of the legendary Mihawk he sought to challenge. Yet the seeds of eventual acceptance had been planted during their conversation. Luffy's casual confidence in his own destiny as future Pirate King, creating a context in which Zoro's individual goals might find new meaning and purpose. The suggestion that the world's greatest swordsman should naturally serve the Pirate King reframed his quest in terms that made joining the crew seem less like abandonment of his dreams than their logical fulfillment. The recognition that true greatness might require collaboration rather than solitary pursuit. The crisis that forced his decision came with Helmeppo's announcement that the original terms of their agreement would not be honored, that execution had always been the intended conclusion regardless of Zoro's compliance with the conditions imposed upon him. This betrayal eliminated any remaining obligation to honor a bargain that had been made in bad faith from the beginning, freeing him to consider alternatives that his sense of honor had previously made impossible to contemplate. Luffy's retrieval of his swords from the marine base transformed the situation from impossible endurance test into manageable tactical problem. The weight of Wado Ichimonji and his other blades in his hands, restoring not just his combat capability, but his sense of identity as someone whose strength could be directed toward purposes he chose rather than merely endured for causes he could not control. The moment of release from his bonds marked not just physical liberation, but the beginning of a partnership that would prove more significant than either participant could have imagined. The display of three-sword style that followed served multiple purposes beyond simply defeating the Marine soldiers who stood between them and freedom. For Luffy, it provided demonstration of abilities that exceeded even his optimistic expectations. Confirmation that his first recruitment had been even more successful than he had dared to hope. For the town's residents, it offered proof that resistance to tyranny was possible, that the power structure they had accepted as permanent could be challenged by those with sufficient courage and capability. But for Zoro himself, the return to combat after days of enforced passivity felt like awakening from a dream in which he had temporarily forgotten who he was meant to be. Each perfectly coordinated movement of his three swords, each technique executed with precision that had been honed through years of dedicated training, each enemy defeated through skills that represented the accumulated wisdom of countless battles, reminded him that his individual strength had always been intended to serve purposes greater than mere personal advancement. The battle against Captain Morgan that followed tested not just their combined combat abilities, but their capacity to function as a team. Despite having known each other for less than a day, Luffy's rubber powers complemented Zoro's swordsmanship in ways that neither had anticipated, their fighting styles meshing with natural harmony that suggested deeper compatibility than their brief acquaintance should have made possible. The victory they achieved together carried implications that extended far beyond the liberation of a single town, demonstrating potential that would only grow stronger as their partnership developed. The town's celebration of their success provided both men with their first taste of what it meant to be heroes, rather than merely strong individuals pursuing personal goals. The gratitude of people who had been freed from genuine oppression, creating emotional rewards that neither had experienced in their previous adventures. Yet it was the quiet moment between them, after the crowds had dispersed, that truly sealed their partnership. Zoro's formal acceptance of Luffy's invitation carrying weight that both understood would reshape the trajectory of their lives. The promise that Zoro extracted from his new captain revealed the depth of his commitment to the dream that had defined his existence since childhood. His insistence that Luffy support his goal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, establishing terms that would govern their relationship for years to come. But more than that, it demonstrated his understanding that true loyalty required honesty about one's own needs and ambitions, that partnerships built on anything less than complete mutual understanding were doomed to eventual failure. Luffy's enthusiastic agreement to those terms, his declaration that the Pirate King's crew should naturally include the world's greatest swordsman, created the foundation upon which everything that followed would be built. The recognition that their individual dreams were not competing ambitions, but complementary goals that would strengthen each other, provided the philosophical framework that would sustain them through trials that would have destroyed partnerships based on lesser foundations. The departure from Shellstown carried symbolic weight that neither man fully articulated but both deeply felt, their small boat heading toward horizons that promised adventures neither could have achieved alone. The marine base that had cast such long shadows over the town's daily life now stood empty of the corruption that had defined it, while the residents who watched them sail away carried new understanding of what was possible when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. For Zoro, the decision to join Luffy's crew represented more than career change or tactical alliance. It was recognition that his individual quest had always been incomplete, that the strength he sought to develop required context and purpose that could only come through service to causes greater than personal advancement. The boy who had promised Quina that one of them would become the world's greatest swordsman had grown into a man who understood that such greatness could only be achieved through relationships that honored both individual dreams and collective responsibilities. The future stretched before them like an uncharted sea, filled with dangers and opportunities that would test every skill they possessed, while demanding growth that neither could achieve through solitary effort. But the foundation had been laid in a marine courtyard, where two strangers had recognized in each other the qualities necessary for pursuing impossible dreams, where loyalty had been freely given and gratefully received, where the next chapter in both their legends had begun with a simple agreement to face whatever came next together rather than alone. The ship that carried them toward their first real adventure together was small and humble, barely adequate for the challenges that awaited them in the waters ahead. But it carried something more valuable than size or equipment. It carried the dreams of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed to transform individual ambitions into shared destiny, the beginning of a partnership that would one day shake the very foundations of the world itself. The East Blue stretched before the newly formed crew like a testing ground designed by fate itself. Each island they encountered, presenting challenges that would forge the bonds between captain and first mate, while revealing the depths of strength that both possessed. The small boat that carried Monkey D, Luffy and Roronoa Zoro away from Shellstown was barely adequate for coastal navigation, yet it served as the vessel upon which dreams of impossible magnitude would begin their journey toward reality. Every league sailed, adding layers of experience that neither could have gained through solitary adventure. Their first real test as a crew came not through planned encounter, but through the kind of accident that seemed to follow Luffy wherever his curiosity led him, his head becoming trapped within the beak of a massive bird whose size defied rational explanation. The sight of his captain disappearing into the sky while attached to a creature that treated the ocean as merely another highway created Zoro's first real crisis of leadership. The recognition that protecting someone whose instincts consistently led him toward the most dangerous possible course of action would require constant vigilance and reflexes honed to supernatural sharpness. The pursuit that followed tested not just Zoro's determination, but his growing understanding of what it meant to be responsible for someone else's safety. Each stroke of the oars carrying him farther from familiar waters, while following a trajectory that made no sense according to any rational plan. Yet the alternative, abandoning his captain to whatever fate awaited him in the talons of a giant bird, was unthinkable for someone whose entire moral framework had been built around the concept of honoring commitments, regardless of personal cost. The three pirates who found themselves rescued from their waterlogged predicament could not have known that their savior represented one of the East Blue's most feared bounty hunters, their gratitude for his assistance transforming into horror as they recognized the man whose reputation had made him legendary among those who operated outside the law. The irony of the situation was not lost on Zoro, that his first act as a member of Luffy's crew involved inadvertently providing aid to the very type of criminals he had spent years hunting for profit. Their attempt to capitalize on what they perceived as a fortunate opportunity revealed the kind of short-sighted thinking that had led to their current desperate circumstances, their plan to rob or murder their rescuer, demonstrating the failure of imagination that kept small-time criminals trapped in cycles of poverty and violence. Yet their recognition of his identity also served to remind Zoro that his past as pirate hunter would follow him wherever his new allegiances led him, that the reputation built through years of successful hunts could not be simply abandoned when it became inconvenient. Orangetown provided their first encounter with the supernatural powers that ruled the Grand Line's more dangerous waters, though Buggy the Clown's devil fruit abilities were deployed more for theatrical effect than genuine tactical advantage. The sight of a human body separating into component parts without apparent injury challenged every assumption Zoro had developed about the nature of physical combat, forcing rapid adaptation to fighting techniques that operated according to rules he had never previously needed to consider. The battle itself proved less challenging than the philosophical questions it raised about the nature of strength in a world where eating the wrong fruit could grant abilities that transcended normal human limitations. Buggy's defeat came not through superior devil fruit powers. Neither Luffy nor Zoro possessed such advantages at the time, but through the application of will and technique that proved more decisive than supernatural gifts, when wielded by those who understood their purpose and limitations. But it was Orangetown's aftermath that provided the more significant lesson. Luffy's invitation to Nami, joining their crew over Zoro's objections, creating the first real disagreement between captain and first mate. Zoro's skepticism stemmed not from prejudice but from tactical assessment, his experience with deception and betrayal, making him naturally suspicious of anyone whose loyalties seemed to shift based on immediate advantage rather than deeper principles. The orange-haired navigator's obvious competence could not be denied. Her skills with weather prediction and route planning, addressing needs that their crew desperately required if they hoped to reach the Grand Line alive. Yet her mercenary approach to relationships, her willingness to manipulate others for personal gain, her casual treatment of trust as a commodity to be traded rather than a sacred bond, created tensions that would persist long after her official recruitment had been completed. Syrup Village's deceptions ran deeper than simple criminal conspiracy. The revelation that respected butler Klahadore was actually the notorious Captain Kuro forcing uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil and its capacity for patient disguise. The man who had spent years earning the trust and affection of his employers while secretly planning their systematic murder represented a kind of malevolence that was far more disturbing than Buggy's theatrical villainy, corruption that wore the mask of respectability while serving purposes that transformed kindness into vulnerability. Usopp's introduction to their crew came through circumstances that tested everyone's understanding of courage and its relationship to truth. The young sniper's elaborate lies serving purposes that extended far beyond mere entertainment or self-aggrandizement. His stories of grand adventures and heroic encounters revealed desperate hunger for significance, the need to transform an ordinary existence into something worthy of remembering and retelling. Yet it was during the battle to protect Kaya and expose Kuro's deception that Usopp's true character emerged. His willingness to face overwhelming odds, rather than allow innocent people to suffer, demonstrating that cowardice and bravery often existed within the same heart, that heroism was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act. Despite it, Zoro's growing respect for the sniper came not from witnessing exceptional skill, but from observing someone who chose to do what was right even when it terrified him. The Going Merry represented more than mere upgrade in transportation, though her superior size and capabilities would prove essential for the challenges that lay ahead. Kaya's gift carried emotional weight that transformed a simple vessel into something approaching sacred trust. The understanding that their ship had been purchased with genuine gratitude rather than mere money, creating obligations that extended far beyond normal crew relationships with their craft. For Zoro, the Merry's spacious deck provided the room necessary for proper training routines, space where he could practice the forms and techniques that kept his skills sharp while developing new approaches that would be needed for increasingly dangerous opponents. The Crow's Nest offered solitude for meditation and reflection, quiet moments where the philosophical aspects of swordsmanship could be contemplated without the distractions that accompanied life, in close quarters with crewmates whose personalities filled every available space. Baraty's floating restaurant presented challenges that went beyond simple combat encounters, the establishment's unique culture forcing Zoro to confront assumptions about strength and its proper applications. The cooks who operated the seagoing restaurant possessed fighting skills that rivaled those of professional warriors, yet they channeled their abilities toward creating and protecting rather than merely destroying, demonstrating that power could serve purposes that elevated rather than diminished the human spirit. Sanji's recruitment proved far more complex than Usopp's straightforward desire for adventure or Nami's mercenary calculation of advantage. The chef's relationship with Redleg Zeph, creating obligations that seemed to make departure impossible regardless of personal desires. The debt of gratitude that bound him to Baraty went beyond simple employment to encompass the fundamental question of how one could ever adequately repay someone who had literally given up part of themselves to preserve another's life. The revelation of Zeph's sacrifice, his consumption of his own leg rather than taking food from a starving child, provided Zoro with new understanding of what devotion actually meant when stripped of sentimentality and reduced to pure action. The old pirate's choice represented the kind of selfless love that transformed relationships into sacred bonds, creating obligations that could not be dissolved through mere desire for different circumstances. Don Krieg's assault on Baraty tested not just the defenders' combat abilities, but their commitment to principles that extended beyond immediate survival. The armored pirates' overwhelming firepower and tactical advantages, proving insufficient against opponents who understood what they were fighting to protect. Zoro's role in the battle was characteristically direct, his swords carving through obstacles that stood between the restaurant and safety, while trusting his captain to handle the larger strategic questions. But it was during this conflict that Zoro encountered Dracul Mihawk, the legendary swordsman whose reputation had shaped his dreams and guided his development since childhood. The meeting came not through careful planning or formal challenge, but as consequence of larger events, the world's strongest swordsman's pursuit of Don Krieg, creating an opportunity that might never come again, despite its terrible timing and circumstances. The duel that followed was less battle than education. Mihawk's casual demonstration of the gap between aspiration and achievement serving as harsh lesson in the realities of strength at the highest levels. His use of a tiny cross-shaped dagger to counter Zoro's three-sword technique was not mere showmanship, but practical demonstration of how completely superior skill could neutralize apparent advantages, technique so refined that additional tools became unnecessary rather than helpful. Zoro's insistence on continuing the fight even after his swords had been shattered revealed both the depth of his determination and the dangerous pride that could transform courage into foolishness when unchecked by wisdom. His declaration that a scar on the back would shame him as a swordsman carried weight that went beyond mere bravado, establishing principles that would govern his conduct in every battle that followed. Mihawk's decision to honor that declaration by striking from the front rather than exploiting his helpless opponent's vulnerability demonstrated the kind of respect that could only exist between warriors who understood what it was meant to stake everything on a single moment. The massive scar that stretched from shoulder to hip would serve as permanent reminder of this encounter, physical evidence of both his current limitations and the standard he would need to achieve if his dream was ever to become reality. The promise extracted from Luffy in the aftermath of his defeat carried implications that neither fully grasped at the time. Zoro's demand that his captain never doubt his eventual success, requiring faith that went beyond mere friendship to encompass absolute belief in possibilities that seemed to contradict available evidence. The tears that accompanied his vow never to lose again revealed depths of emotional pain that his stoic exterior usually concealed, vulnerability that made his strength more rather than less impressive. Arlong Park forced the crew to confront systematic oppression that went beyond individual villainy to encompass entire power structures built upon the exploitation of those deemed inferior by accident of birth. The fishman's hatred of humans was not simple prejudice, but the twisted offspring of genuine injustice. Discrimination so pervasive and brutal that it had transformed victims into mirrors of their oppressors, perpetuating cycles of violence that served no constructive purpose. Nami's true story, revealed through circumstances that stripped away every pretense and defense she had constructed over years of careful deception, demonstrated the lengths to which desperate love could drive someone who possessed no other means of protecting those she cared about. Her willingness to endure isolation, suspicion, and contempt, rather than reveal the impossible burden she carried, spoke to devotion that shamed every doubt her crewmates had harbored about her loyalty. The destruction of Arlong Park represented more than simple victory over a powerful enemy. It was declaration that the past did not have to determine the future, that cycles of hatred could be broken by those with sufficient courage to choose different paths. Zoro's role in the battle-tested skills that had been developing since his defeat by Mihawk, his growing mastery of techniques that could cut through seemingly impossible defenses, proving that the gap between aspiration and achievement was narrowing through dedication and experience. Logtown provided fitting conclusion to their East Blue adventures, the city where the previous pirate king had ended his journey, becoming the place where the next would begin his approach toward the Grand Line. The execution platform where Gold D, Roger had died, represented both inspiration and warning, proof that even the greatest dreams could be achieved, but also evidence that every triumph carried within it the seeds of its own conclusion. Zoro's encounter with Tashigi created complications that went beyond mere mistaken identity, her resemblance to Quina forcing him to confront emotions he had believed safely buried with his childhood friend. The Marine swordswoman's dedication to justice and her skill with a blade provided unwelcome reminders of the promise that had shaped his entire life, while her obvious strength suggested that gender limitations might be less absolute than he had been taught to believe. The cursed sword Sandai Kitetsu presented him with a different kind of test, the decision to risk his arm against the blade's legendary malevolence, demonstrating faith in his own luck or destiny that went beyond rational calculation. The weapon's acceptance of him as its wielder created bonds that extended beyond mere ownership to encompass partnership between human will and steel that had tasted blood for generations. Buggy's return and his alliance with Alvida should have represented serious threat to their escape plans, yet the lightning bolt that shattered the execution platform and saved Luffy's life suggested forces at work that transcended normal understanding of cause and effect. The storm that carried them to safety felt like divine intervention, though whether such interpretations reflected reality or mere wishful thinking would remain eternally unclear. Smoker's pursuit provided a glimpse of marine power that operated on entirely different levels than the corruption they had encountered in Shell's town. His Moku Moku no Mi abilities creating tactical challenges that could not be overcome through conventional swordsmanship. The captain's dedication to justice, however misguided his methods might seem from their perspective, commanded respect that made him dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his devil fruit powers. The mysterious figure who intervened to save them from Smoker's capture remained unnamed and unexplained, his presence hinting at larger forces moving behind the scenes, whose existence would only be revealed when circumstances demanded such knowledge. The wind that carried them to safety bore implications that reached far beyond meteorology, suggesting that some stories were too important to end before they had truly begun. As the Going Merry carried its crew toward Reverse Mountain and the entrance to the Grand Line, Zoro stood at the bow with his 3 swords secured at his side, surrounded by people who had chosen to share Luffy's impossible dream while pursuing their own ambitions within the framework of collective purpose. The East Blue stretched behind them like a completed chapter, its lessons learned and its challenges overcome, while ahead lay waters that had swallowed countless dreams and islands where the rules that governed civilized behavior held no sway. The monsters they would face in those legendary waters would possess power that dwarfed anything they had yet encountered, enemies whose abilities operated according to principles they could barely imagine. But they faced the unknown future with confidence born of shared trials, secure in the knowledge that bonds forged through genuine adversity could withstand pressures that would shatter partnerships based on lesser foundations. The boy who had promised a dying friend that one of them would become the world's greatest swordsman had grown into a young man capable of keeping that promise, not through solitary achievement, but through service to a cause that elevated individual dreams into something approaching destiny. The foundations of legend had been laid in small acts of courage and decisive moments of choice, in the gradual accumulation of trust that would prove stronger than any obstacle the world might place before them. The real adventure was only beginning, but the East Blue had provided everything necessary for what lay ahead. Skills honed through genuine combat, friendships tested under pressure, understanding of what it meant to fight for something greater than personal advancement. The Grand Line beckoned with challenges that would test every lesson learned, but they sailed toward those trials as more than mere pirates seeking treasure. They were a family bound by shared dreams, ready to prove that some bonds transcended even the legendary dangers that awaited in the waters ahead. The entrance to the Grand Line rose before them like a monument to impossibility itself. Reverse Mountain, thrusting skyward from the heart of the ocean, with such audacious defiance of natural law that it seemed less geological formation than divine challenge to those who dared pursue dreams larger than the world appeared, willing to accommodate. As the going merry approached this magnificent anomaly that served as gateway between the familiar waters of the East Blue and the legendary sea beyond, Zoro felt the weight of transition settling upon his shoulders, like a mantle woven from equal parts anticipation and foreboding. The currents that carried them up the mountain's impossible slope moved with power that dwarfed anything they had previously encountered, transforming their small vessel into little more than driftwood, caught in forces that operated according to principles no navigator could fully comprehend. Zoro's training had prepared him for many forms of danger, but the helplessness of being carried skyward by water that flowed uphill challenged every assumption he had developed about the relationship between human will and natural forces. The summit revealed sights that would remain etched in memory for the remainder of his days. 4 great currents, converging from 4 different seas in collision of waters that had traveled impossible distances to reach this single point of convergence. Yet it was not the geographical marvel that captured his attention so completely, but the whale whose massive presence dominated the junction like a living island, whose very existence redefined understanding of what was possible in the world's vast oceans. Laboon floated in the convergence point with scars covering his ancient hide that spoke of decades of self-inflicted anguish, wounds that had nothing to do with battles against enemies, and everything to do with pain too deep for human comprehension. The whale's eyes, when they finally focused on the small ship that had invaded his solitary domain, held sadness so profound that it seemed to encompass all the loneliness that had ever existed, all the faithfulness that had been rewarded with nothing but silence and the endless passage of time. The collision with Laboon's massive form should have meant death for their entire crew, yet somehow they found themselves not destroyed but swallowed, drawn into the whale's stomach through processes that challenged both logic and maritime experience. The interior proved to be not the digestive chamber they might have expected, but something far stranger, a complete ecosystem with its own ocean, island, and lighthouse that served as home to perhaps the most unusual doctor any of them would ever encounter. Crocus emerged from his impossible dwelling like a character from one of Usopp's most elaborate tales, an old man who had chosen to spend his final years tending to wounds that could never truly heal, caring for a creature whose heartbreak had become legend among those who knew the true stories of the Grand Line. His explanation of Laboon's history revealed layers of tragedy that spoke to fundamental truths about loyalty and loss, about the prices that love demanded from those brave enough to embrace connections that transcended species and circumstance. The Rumbar pirates' promise to return after completing their journey around the Grand Line had been made with the casual confidence of those who had never truly confronted the reality of what such a voyage demanded. Their failure to keep that promise stemming not from betrayal or forgetfulness, but from the brutal mathematics of a sea that claimed lives without regard for the commitments those lives had made. 50 years of waiting had transformed what should have been temporary separation into monument to faithfulness that shamed every human example of devotion. Laboon's attempts to breach Reverse Mountain represented more than mere animal instinct. They were expressions of hope so pure that it had survived decades of disappointment, faith so complete that it continued to believe in possibilities that rational observation had proved impossible. Each time the whale hurled himself against the red line, he was not seeking passage so much as declaring his refusal to accept a reality where promises could be broken by forces beyond anyone's control. The battle that erupted between Luffy and Laboon challenged every assumption Zoro had developed about the nature of communication and understanding, his captain's rubber fists striking the whale's hide, not in anger, but in something approaching conversation between kindred spirits. Neither could truly harm the other. Luffy's attacks were insufficient to damage something of Laboon's size, while the whale's massive strength was restrained by recognition that his opponent was not truly an enemy. The resolution came through understanding rather than victory. Luffy's recognition that Laboon's pain stemmed from love rather than anger, leading to promises that honored the whale's devotion, while acknowledging that some losses could never be completely healed. The crude painting of his Jolly Roger, left on Laboon's scarred hide, served multiple purposes, marking not just commitment to return, but declaration that some bonds transcended species barriers, that friendship could exist between beings whose lives operated on vastly different scales. The log pose that Crocus provided represented more than navigational equipment. It was key to understanding how the Grand Line operated according to rules that existed nowhere else in the world. Magnetic fields that defied conventional understanding of how compasses functioned, while requiring sailors to surrender preconceptions about navigation and embrace methods that seemed to border on magic. The devices steady, pointing toward their first destination, carried implications about the journey ahead that none of them fully grasped at the time. Whiskey Peak welcomed them with hospitality so overwhelming that it should have triggered every instinct for suspicion that life on dangerous seas was supposed to cultivate. Yet the celebration that greeted their arrival felt genuine enough to make wariness seem like paranoia. The townspeople's enthusiasm for new pirates appeared authentic in ways that made caution feel unnecessarily cynical. Their joy at seeing fresh faces, suggesting isolation that had made any visitors precious, regardless of their intentions or affiliations. Only Zoro's unwavering vigilance prevented what should have been a night of rest from becoming massacre of the unprepared. His refusal to allow alcohol to cloud his judgment, proving decisive when masks finally fell and the town's true nature revealed itself. The revelation that Whiskey Peak was nothing more than an elaborate trap designed to capture pirates seeking refuge demonstrated how thoroughly evil could disguise itself as kindness how completely corruption could infiltrate even the most welcoming communities. The battle that erupted when deceptions collapsed revealed both the extent of Zoro's growth since entering the Grand Line and the dangerous gap that still separated his abilities from those required for survival in these legendary waters. The 100 bounty hunters who assembled to capture them possessed skills and coordination that exceeded anything they had faced in the East Blue, their defeat serving as measurement of progress, while highlighting how much further development would be needed for the challenges ahead. The misunderstanding with Luffy that followed demonstrated the dangers that arose when crew members acted without complete information, loyalty becoming liability when communication broke down, and assumptions filled gaps that should have been bridged by trust. Yet even in conflict, their fundamental respect for each other remained intact, neither allowing anger to poison bonds that had been forged through shared adversity and mutual dependence. Princess Vivi's revelation transformed their understanding of everything they had experienced since entering the Grand Line, recontextualizing random encounters as pieces of larger puzzle that involved the fate of entire kingdoms and millions of innocent lives. Her story introduced them to political complexities that went far beyond simple adventure, situations where individual strength could shape destinies of nations, while personal choices carried implications that reached across continents. Little Garden provided their first encounter with beings whose very existence challenged human understanding of what was possible. Dory and Brogy representing strength and honor on scales that made even their most impressive achievements seem humble by comparison. The giant century-long duel had transcended rational resolution to become something approaching religious observance. Combat transformed into sacred ritual that honored principles larger than individual victory or defeat. The warriors' friendship maintained even as they sought to kill each other with methods that would have shattered mountains, demonstrated complex relationships between love and violence that could only exist in hearts large enough to contain such contradictions. Their willingness to continue fighting for reasons that most would consider trivial revealed commitment to values that went beyond practical consideration to encompass absolute dedication to keeping promises regardless of cost. Mr. Three's intervention in their duel represented everything toxic about those who manipulated conflicts for personal advantage, his wax-based powers creating tactical challenges that required more than straightforward combat to overcome. The slow torture of becoming living statues provided Zoro with his first real taste of hopelessness since joining Luffy's crew. The gradual loss of mobility, forcing recognition that some enemies possessed abilities that made conventional resistance meaningless. Luffy's rescue attempt accelerated rather than prevented the deadly process, demonstrating that good intentions without adequate understanding could worsen situations they were meant to improve. It was only through Usopp's unexpected courage and Mr. Five's explosive abilities that escape became possible, their salvation coming through unlikely alliance with enemies who possessed grudges against common foes. Drum Island's winter wasteland provided environmental challenges that tested survival skills in ways that combat never could, conditions so harsh that basic existence became primary concern regardless of whatever other objectives they might have harbored. The snow-covered landscape stretched endlessly in directions that offered no shelter, broken only by castle that crowned the mountain like fairy tale illustration brought to terrifying life. Wapol's tyranny demonstrated different kind of evil than they had previously encountered. Petty cruelty of someone who possessed power without wisdom, authority without compassion, his ability to consume and transform anything according to his will made him living symbol of unchecked power's capacity to devour everything around it while creating nothing of lasting value. His kingdom's suffering, serving as monument to what happened when strength served only selfish desires. Dr. Hiriluk's story revealed tragic consequences that could result when noble intentions met implacable reality without sufficient power to bridge the gap between vision and accomplishment. His dream of healing his country's wounded spirit through simple beauty of cherry blossoms had been admirable in conception, but naive in execution, leading to sacrifice that achieved nothing beyond inspiring others to carry forward work he could not complete. Chopper's recruitment represented victory over prejudices that went deeper than mere species differences, his medical knowledge proving invaluable for adventures ahead, while his transformation from monster to family member demonstrated that acceptance could transcend barriers that seemed absolute. The reindeer's devotion to healing provided perfect complement to crew whose adventures consistently resulted in injuries that required more than basic first aid. The climb up Drum Rockies with unconscious crew members on his back became one of Luffy's most powerful demonstrations of strength that came from protecting others. His willingness to push beyond normal limitations when people he cared about were in danger, creating bonds with creatures that recognized something pure in his determination. The Lapan that eventually aided his ascent understood devotion that transcended species barriers, responding to purpose so genuine that it commanded respect, even from beings with no reason to trust humans. Alabaster's civil war provided their first encounter with conflicts that went beyond individual villainy to encompass systematic manipulation of entire populations. Crocodile's conspiracy demonstrating how thoroughly corruption could infiltrate legitimate institutions while serving purposes that transformed patriotism into weapon against those it claimed to protect. The revelation that Mr. Zero was actually one of the 7 warlords elevated their understanding of the power structures that governed the Grand Line, making clear that their adventures had attracted attention from organizations whose reach extended across the world. Zoro's battle with Mr. One represented philosophical awakening as much as physical test, his opponent's ability to transform his entire body into steel, creating challenges that forced fundamental re-examination of what it meant to cut through obstacles. The lesson that emerged from their confrontation went beyond mere technique to encompass understanding of breath that connected all things, awareness that allowed discrimination between what should be severed and what should be preserved. The moment of breakthrough came not through increased strength but through expanded consciousness, his ability to sense the breathing of steel, allowing cuts that had previously been impossible while simultaneously teaching restraint that prevented destruction of what should remain whole. The victory over Mr. One marked his evolution from someone who fought through instinct and training alone to warrior whose abilities were informed by deeper understanding of forces that operated beyond physical law. Sky Island's approach required faith that went beyond rational calculation. Their ascent on the knock-up stream, demanding trust in forces that seemed designed to destroy, rather than transport anyone foolish enough to attempt such passage. The journey skyward tested not just their ship's structural integrity, but their commitment to pursuing adventures that led into realms where normal rules no longer applied. The cloud ocean that surrounded Skypiea challenged every assumption they had developed about what was possible in world they thought they understood, its very existence proving that horizons always contained possibilities that exceeded imagination. The dials that served as foundation for Skypian technology demonstrated that innovation could emerge from any environment when necessity demanded solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Enel's dominance over Sky Island represented power so overwhelming that conventional resistance seemed futile, his ability to control lightning making him appear godlike to populations that had never encountered devil fruit abilities of such magnitude. Yet his defeat came not through superior supernatural powers, but through application of rubber properties that rendered his electrical attacks harmless, proving that even seemingly invincible abilities possessed weaknesses that could be exploited by those clever enough to recognize them. The golden bells ringing marked more than simple victory over tyranny. It was fulfillment of promise made 400 years earlier, proof that some debts could be honored across centuries when people possessed sufficient determination to see commitments through to completion. The sound that echoed across sky and sea carried messages that reached far beyond immediate celebration to encompass hope that transcended time itself. Water 7 would test their bonds in ways that combat never could, revealing that some challenges came not from external enemies, but from internal contradictions that threatened to tear apart relationships they had believed unshakable. The shipwright's diagnosis of the Going Mary's condition forced recognition that some things, no matter how beloved, could not be preserved simply through determination and care. The road ahead promised trials that would test every skill they had developed while demanding growth that seemed almost impossible to achieve. Yet, they sailed toward those challenges with confidence, born of shared experiences that had proven their bonds stronger than any obstacle. The Grand Line had accepted them as worthy contenders in the greatest game ever played, its lessons preparing them for adventures that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to pursue dreams that seemed too large for any single lifetime to contain. The boy who had promised a dying friend that one of them would become the world's greatest swordsman was growing into someone capable of keeping that promise, not through abandonment of other commitments, but through recognition that individual dreams achieved greater meaning when pursued within framework of collective purpose. The Grand Line's early lessons had taught him that strength without companions was merely loneliness disguised as power, that true greatness could only be achieved through bonds that elevated everyone they touched. The arrival at Water 7 should have been a moment of triumph, their ship finally reaching the legendary city of shipwrights after successfully navigating treacherous waters that had claimed so many vessels before them. Instead, the Going Mary's labored breathing cast shadows over what should have been celebration. Her hull, groaning with each wave that struck her sides, her masts straining under pressures that once would have been effortless to bear. The ship that had carried them faithfully across the East Blue and through their early Grand Line adventures was dying, and everyone aboard could feel her pain as surely as if it were carved into their own flesh. The diagnosis delivered by Kaku struck Roronoa Zoro like a physical blow, the Galila shipwright's professional assessment cutting through any hope that routine repairs might suffice to restore their beloved vessel. The Going Mary had suffered damage that transcended superficial wear, structural failures that threatened her very integrity as a seaworthy craft, wounds that went deeper than wood and metal to touch something approaching the ship's soul. The keel itself was compromised, that crucial spine upon which everything else depended, leaving them with a vessel that might sink at any moment regardless of weather conditions or navigator skill. For Zoro, the prospect of abandoning the Mary represented more than mere change of transportation. It felt like betrayal of friend who had never failed them, whose cheerful figurehead had smiled through every storm and celebrated every victory alongside the crew she had carried through adventures that should have been impossible for such a small vessel to survive. The ship had been Kaya's gift, tangible expression of faith in their dreams. But more than that, she had become member of their family in ways that transcended her status as inanimate object. The conflict with Usopp over the Mary's fate exposed fault lines in their crew that none of them had wanted to acknowledge, the ways that different perspectives on loyalty and responsibility could drive wedges between people who loved each other deeply. Usopp saw in the ship's abandonment a preview of his own eventual disposal, his fears about his relative weakness within the crew manifesting as desperate attachment to the one member who might be considered more expendable than himself, whose limitations were becoming as apparent as his own. The duel that followed was perhaps the most painful battle Zoro had ever witnessed, not because of any physical danger it presented, but because of what it represented. The first time Luffy had been forced to take up arms against someone he considered family. Every blow struck felt like violation of bonds they had forged through shared adversity. Every moment of combat a testament to his captain's failure to find solutions that preserved both safety and unity, choices that honored both practical necessity and emotional truth. Usopp's defeat was inevitable from the moment their fight began, but his courage in challenging someone he knew to be stronger spoke to depths of desperation and sincerity of convictions that commanded respect even in the face of obvious futility. The tears that fell as he acknowledged his loss were not just grief for the going merry, but recognition that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired, that some wounds would leave scars regardless of how completely they might eventually heal. The mysterious identities of their supposed allies created layers of deception that went far beyond simple criminal activity. The revelation that Iceberg's trusted associates were actually government agents, demonstrating how completely espionage could infiltrate even the most secure organizations. Rob Lucci, Kaku, Khalifa, and Blueno had spent years building false identities that felt genuine while serving purposes that were anything but. Their performance so complete that even experienced intelligence operatives might have been deceived by the depth of their commitment to maintaining cover. CP9's involvement in the conspiracy demonstrated the reach and ruthlessness of the world government's intelligence apparatus, their willingness to sacrifice entire cities, if doing so served larger strategic objectives. The agents' casual approach to mass murder revealed institutional indifference to civilian casualties that went beyond mere callousness to encompass systematic dehumanization of anyone who stood between them and their goals. Philosophy that treated individual lives as acceptable losses in service to abstract political purposes. Robin's apparent betrayal struck the crew like lightning from clear sky, transforming someone they had come to trust into figure whose very presence called their judgment into question. Her calm announcement that she was leaving them forever, that she had been using them from the beginning, seemed to make mockery of everything they thought they had learned about reading people's hearts and understanding their motivations, challenging assumptions about loyalty that had seemed as solid as the ship's keel. The truth behind Robin's actions, when it finally emerged, revealed crushing weight of government persecution that had shaped her entire existence since childhood. The O'Hara incident had marked her as criminal before she was old enough to understand what knowledge could be dangerous, had forced her to live as fugitive, whose very survival depended on her ability to disappear whenever those who sheltered her faced consequences for their compassion, existence that transformed every relationship into potential death sentence for those who showed her kindness. The journey to Eni's lobby represented more than rescue mission. It was declaration of war against the most powerful organization in the world, statement that some bonds were worth defending regardless of consequences such defense might bring. The fortress that guarded the gates of justice had never fallen to external attack, its reputation built on centuries of successful deterrence against pirates who might otherwise challenge government authority, walls that had witnessed the disappearance of countless individuals whose only crime had been possessing knowledge or connections that threatened established order. Zoro's preparation for the assault required him to set aside every tactical consideration that had governed his approach to combat since leaving Shimotsuki village. His recognition that this battle would be unlike anything they had previously faced, demanding evolution in both technique and philosophy. The enemies they would encounter possessed skills and resources that made their previous opponents seem like children playing at war. Government agents whose training had been designed specifically to eliminate threats to world stability. The infiltration of the judicial island tested every skill they had developed while revealing how much they still had to learn about coordinating complex operations under conditions where failure would result in the permanent loss of someone they considered family. Each member of the assault team faced opponents who pushed them beyond their previous limitations, forcing growth that could only come through confrontation with forces that threatened everything they valued most deeply. The battle with Kaku provided Zoro with his first encounter with Zoan awakening, the transformed giraffe's enhanced abilities creating tactical challenges that went beyond anything he had previously imagined possible. The agent's mastery of Rokushiki techniques combined with his devil fruit powers created fighting style that seemed designed to exploit every weakness in conventional swordsmanship. His Rankyaku wind blades, forcing recognition that ranged attacks could be as deadly as close combat when wielded by someone who understood their strategic applications. Yet it was not Kaku's supernatural abilities that made him truly dangerous, but rather his absolute dedication to missions that transcended personal considerations, his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in service to objectives that had been defined by superiors whose faces he would never see. The agent's casual approach to mass murder revealed training that had stripped away every human instinct except those that served organizational purposes, education that had transformed natural empathy into liability to be overcome rather than strength to be cultivated. The victory that eventually emerged came not through superior power, but through superior purpose. Zoro's understanding of what he was fighting to protect, providing strength that no amount of government training could match. His new techniques, developed through necessity during the heat of battle, demonstrated growth that went beyond mere physical improvement to encompass evolution. In his relationship with the swords that had become extensions of his will and spirit, the destruction of Robin's handcuffs became symbol of liberation that extended far beyond one person's freedom, representing their collective refusal to accept that anyone's past could be used as chains to bind their future. The sea stone shackles that fell away were not just restraints on devil fruit powers, but representations of all the ways the world tried to convince people that they deserved whatever punishment had been assigned to them. That resistance to established authority was not just futile, but morally wrong. Robin's declaration that she wanted to live echoed across Eni's lobby like battle cry, transforming what had been rescue mission into something approaching revolution. Her words carried weight of 20 years spent believing that survival was the best she could hope for, that happiness was luxury, too dangerous to pursue, that accepting solitude was preferable to risking pain that came with genuine connection to others who might suffer for their association with her. The fall of Eni's lobby sent shockwaves throughout the world that went far beyond immediate tactical consequences of the fortress's destruction, the first successful challenge to world government authority in living memory, proving that claims of invincibility were based more on reputation than reality. For first time in centuries, pirates had successfully assaulted the system's most secure installation and emerged victorious, demonstrating that even the most entrenched power structures could be overcome by those who possessed sufficient courage and capability. Luffy's breakthrough to Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd during his battle with Rob Lucci provided glimpse of potential that went beyond anything Zoro had previously witnessed, techniques that pushed human physiology to limits that seemed to approach supernatural enhancement. The rubber properties that had always defined his captain's fighting style were transformed from simple advantage into foundation for abilities that challenged understanding of what was possible through devil fruit mastery alone. The Going Merry's final voyage to rescue her crew was perhaps her greatest moment. The dying ship finding strength she should not have possessed to reach friends who needed her one last time. Her appearance at exactly the right moment felt like miracle to those who witnessed it, though those who understood deeper connections between people and vessels that carried them recognized it as something far more profound. Love expressing itself through sacrifice that transcended normal boundaries between living and inanimate. The funeral that followed their escape from Eni's lobby was unlike any ceremony Zoro had ever participated in. Formal acknowledgement that something cherished had ended, that gratitude was owed for service that could never be adequately repaid. The tears that fell as the going merry's spirit spoke to them one final time were not just grief, but recognition that some relationships transcended boundaries between human and object, that bonds forged through shared adventure could survive even death itself. Frankie's offer to build them new ship came at exactly the moment when such generosity was most needed, his skills and materials combining to create something that honored memory of what they had lost while providing capabilities that exceeded anything they had previously possessed. The Thousand Sunny represented not just replacement, but evolution. Vessel designed specifically for their needs and dreams. Ship that could carry them toward adventures that the going merry, beloved though she had been, could never have survived. The recruitment of Frankie himself required more persuasion than invitation. The cyborg's attachment to Water 7 and his responsibilities there creating obstacles that had nothing to do with unwillingness to join their adventures. His eventual agreement came only after his surrogate family made clear that his departure would honor rather than betray relationships that had shaped him. That true loyalty sometimes required leaving those you loved in order to pursue purposes that would make their sacrifices meaningful. The revelation of Pluton's blueprints and their destruction demonstrated Frankie's understanding that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve, that weapons capable of reshaping the world through destruction should not exist regardless of how they might be used or who might control them. His choice to burn information that represented lifetime of accumulated wisdom spoke to principles that valued preservation of life over advancement of technology, recognition that some innovations served no constructive purpose. Kokoro's true identity as mermaid added layers to their understanding of discrimination and acceptance. Her willingness to live among humans, despite potential persecution, providing example of courage that went beyond physical bravery to encompass emotional openness in face of possible rejection. Her assistance during their escape demonstrated that allies could emerge from unexpected sources when causes were just and needs were genuine. The Buster Call's implementation revealed the world government's willingness to employ ultimate sanctions when conventional methods proved insufficient. The systematic destruction of Eni's lobby, serving as warning to anyone who might consider challenging established authority. The naval bombardment that reduced centuries of construction to rubble in minutes demonstrated power that made individual strength seem insignificant by comparison, forcing recognition that some enemies possessed resources that went far beyond personal combatability. The escape from that overwhelming firepower required every skill they had developed, working in perfect coordination, each crew member's contribution proving essential to survival rather than merely helpful to success. The bonds that had been tested by Robin's apparent betrayal and strengthened by her rescue were now forged into something approaching unbreakable unity. Shared experience of facing impossible odds, creating connections that would endure whatever trials lay ahead. The aftermath brought recognition that their actions had consequences, extending far beyond their immediate circle. Bounty increases, reflecting not just individual achievements but collective acknowledgement that they had evolved from promising rookies into genuine threats to existing order. The titles and rewards offered by various organizations demonstrated that their success had attracted attention from powers whose notice could be either blessing or curse, depending on circumstances. Water 7 had tested them in ways that no previous adventure had attempted, forcing confrontation with truths about loyalty, sacrifice, and the prices that dreams demanded from those who pursued them with genuine dedication. The lessons learned would influence every subsequent decision they made, understanding that some losses were necessary for growth, that some bonds were worth any sacrifice required to preserve them. That true strength came not from individual ability, but from willingness to risk everything for those who had earned such devotion. The departure from the city of ships carried symbolic weight that none of them fully articulated, but all deeply felt. Their new vessel heading toward horizons that promised challenges that would test every aspect of their development, while pointing toward adventures that would make their previous exploits seem like preparation rather than culmination. They sailed forward, not just as pirates seeking treasure, but as family bound by experiences that had proven their connection stronger than any force the world could bring to bear against them. The mists that shrouded Thriller Bark carried with them whispers of the supernatural, legends made manifest in waters where the boundary between life and death had grown thin enough to step across without realizing the journey had begun. The massive ship that emerged from those ethereal veils defied every assumption about what was possible on the seas. Its size, dwarfing islands they had previously visited, while its Gothic architecture spoke of purposes that went far beyond mere transportation or even conquest. This floating fortress represented something entirely new in their experience, a place where the rules that governed normal existence had been suspended in favor of experiments that challenged the very nature of reality itself. Roronoa Zoro's first glimpse of Brook provided him with paradox that would have seemed impossible before entering the Grand Line's more mysterious waters. A living skeleton whose very existence suggested that death itself might be negotiable under the right circumstances. The musician's cheerful demeanor seemed completely at odds with his macabre appearance, his jokes about being dead carrying undertones that went beyond mere humor to encompass genuine philosophical questions about what it meant to be alive, what separated existence from mere persistence, what obligations the departed owed to promises made while breathing. The revelation of Brook's past, through fragmented stories and half-remembered songs, painted picture of loyalty so profound that it had transcended mortality itself. The Rumbar pirate's final moments creating bonds that 50 years of solitude could not sever. His devil fruit power had granted him second chance at existence, but that gift had come with loneliness so complete that it had nearly driven him mad during the decades spent wandering empty seas, with nothing but memories for company and music. As his only means of maintaining connection to humanity, he could no longer fully claim. The island's inhabitants proved to be mixture of the genuinely supernatural and the artificially created, zombies animated through Gecko Moria's shadow-stealing abilities serving alongside creatures that had emerged from graves of their own accord. The atmosphere that permeated every corner of Thriller Bark spoke of experiments that had gone beyond scientific curiosity to embrace wholesale manipulation of forces that most people preferred to leave undisturbed, research that treated the barrier between life and death as obstacle to be overcome rather than natural law to be respected. Dr. Hogback's laboratory represented perversion of medical knowledge that made Zoro's stomach turn, the brilliant surgeon's skills employed not for healing but for creation of abominations that served purposes ranging from entertainment to warfare. The realization that Sindri, the zombie maid whose beauty seemed untouched by death, had once been living woman whose grave had been robbed to provide raw materials for their host's twisted fantasies, added personal dimension to evil that might otherwise have remained abstract. Absalom's abilities created tactical challenges that went beyond mere invisibility to encompass complete sensory negation. His Suke no Mi powers, allowing him to become undetectable through conventional means while retaining full capacity for attack. The Lion Man's obsession with Nami transformed what might have been straightforward combat encounter into something far more personal and disturbing. his intentions making clear that some enemies represented threats that went beyond mere physical violence to encompass violations that could never be adequately avenged. The zombies that populated Thriller Bark were more tragic than terrifying, victims of Moria's ambition rather than willing participants in his schemes of conquest and expansion. Their animation, through stolen shadows, created existences that were neither truly alive nor properly dead, consciousness trapped within decaying flesh that retained memories of life, while serving purposes that bore no relation to their original dreams and ambitions. Zoro's encounter with the zombie samurai Ryuma provided him with an opponent whose reputation had survived centuries. Legendary swordsmen whose skills had become foundation for stories told throughout Wano country and beyond. The battle that followed tested not just his current abilities but his understanding of what it meant to carry blade with honor. His opponent's technique, demonstrating mastery that had been refined through lifetimes of dedication to principles that transcended mere victory or defeat. The duel itself became conversation conducted through steel, each exchange of blows carrying philosophical weight that went beyond simple combat to encompass questions about legacy, honor, and the obligations that living warriors owed to those who had come before them. Ryuma's respect for Zoro's skills grew throughout their encounter. The ancient swordsman, recognizing qualities that marked his opponent as worthy successor to traditions that connected all true practitioners of the blade across centuries and cultures. Victory over the legendary samurai carried implications that extended far beyond claiming superior technique. Ryuma's gift of Shusui representing acknowledgement that some treasures could only be passed to those who had proven themselves worthy of carrying their weight. The black blade that became his prize was not mere weapon but accumulated legacy of everyone who had ever wielded it with honor, responsibility that would influence every subsequent battle he fought. Moria's control over shadows created strategic challenges that conventional combat training could never have prepared them to face. The warlord's ability to steal and manipulate the essence that connected body to soul, representing power that operated according to rules that seemed to transcend natural law. The loss of shadow carried implications that went beyond mere inconvenience to encompass existential threat. Victims condemned to disintegration should sunlight ever touch their flesh again. The battle against Oz tested their ability to function as a coordinated team against opponent whose size made individual attacks meaningless. The ancient giant's resurrection through Luffy's shadow, creating enemy that possessed their captain's techniques, while lacking the restraint and wisdom that made those abilities serve constructive purposes. The zombies' rampages through Thriller Bark demonstrated what Luffy's powers might accomplish if divorced from the moral framework that normally governed their application. Yet it was not the giant's overwhelming physical presence that made him truly dangerous, but rather the way his existence represented perversion of everything their captain stood for. Luffy's techniques employed for destruction rather than protection, his signature attacks transformed into weapons of conquest rather than tools of liberation. Fighting Oz meant confronting dark reflection of their own potential, recognition that power without proper guidance could become indistinguishable from evil, regardless of its original source. Moria's philosophy of relying entirely on subordinates while avoiding personal risk represented everything that Zoro found contemptible about those who possess strength without accepting responsibility. The warlord's retreat into shadow manipulation, demonstrating what happened when natural cowardice was combined with supernatural power. His defeat of previous crews through systematic elimination of their shadows had built reputation founded on others' accomplishments rather than personal achievement. The revelation that Moria had once possessed ambition and courage equal to any pirate's provided tragic context for his current state. The loss of his original crew to Kaido's overwhelming might having transformed someone who might have been hero into hollow shell that existed only to accumulate power he lacked courage to employ directly. The psychological wounds inflicted by that ancient defeat had proven more crippling than any physical injury, reducing him to caricature of leadership that inspired fear without commanding genuine respect. Nightmare Luffy's emergence represented fusion of power and personality that seemed to transcend normal limitations on what single individual could accomplish. The combination of 100 shadows, creating temporary existence that possessed capabilities approaching the legendary. Yet the technique's inherent instability demonstrated why such shortcuts to strength inevitably failed. Artificial enhancement, proving no substitute for growth achieved through genuine effort and experience. The celebration that followed Moria's defeat should have marked conclusion of their adventure on Thriller Bark, their victory over the warlord and liberation of countless shadow victims, providing satisfaction that came from helping others while advancing their own goals. The return of stolen shadows restored proper relationship between body and soul for hundreds of victims, their gratitude providing emotional rewards that made all their struggles worthwhile. Bartholomew Kuma's arrival transformed what should have been a moment of triumph into confrontation with power that made their previous battles seem like practice exercises. The revolutionaries' poor fruit abilities, creating tactical challenges that seemed designed to demonstrate the gap between their current strength and what would be required for survival in the new world. His casual dismissal of their combined attacks revealed capabilities that operated on an entirely different level than anything they had previously encountered. The ultimatum that Kuma presented carried implications that went far beyond immediate tactical considerations. His offer to spare their lives in exchange for their captain, creating moral crisis that tested every principle they claimed to hold dear. The suggestion that individual survival could be purchased through betrayal of the person who had given their lives meaning and purpose revealed the kind of impossible choice that separated those who merely claimed loyalty from those who genuinely embodied it. Zoro's response to that ultimatum defined him as completely as any battle he had ever fought, his immediate rejection of any deal that required abandoning Luffy, demonstrating understanding of loyalty that transcended rational calculation. His willingness to face certain death rather than consider betrayal spoke to bonds that had grown stronger than self-preservation. Commitment that made survival without honor seem worse than death with dignity intact. The negotiation that followed tested Kuma's own understanding of honor and sacrifice. The revolutionaries' recognition that some forms of devotion deserved respect, even from enemies, creating possibility for alternative that preserved essential principles while acknowledging practical necessities. His agreement to spare Luffy in exchange for Zoro's life represented accommodation between opposing forces that shared common understanding of what truly mattered. The demonstration of Luffy's accumulated pain and fatigue provided Zoro with preview of what accepting Kuma's terms would actually entail. The small sample of his captain's suffering proving almost unbearable despite representing tiny fraction of the total burden. The paw-shaped manifestation of everything Luffy had endured during their adventure on Thriller Bark created physical representation of the prices that leadership demanded, the accumulated cost of making decisions that affected others' lives and well-being. Kuma's warning that absorbing such concentrated anguish would almost certainly result in death added final element to calculation that should have made any rational person reconsider. The certainty of destruction providing last opportunity for self-preservation that honor would permit. Yet, Zoro's response revealed that his commitment to protecting Luffy had already moved beyond rational consideration to encompass absolute dedication that made personal survival irrelevant compared to fulfilling obligations he had freely chosen. Sanji's intervention at the crucial moment demonstrated that Zoro was not alone in his willingness to sacrifice everything for their captain. The cook's offer to take his place speaking to devotion that matched his own, while creating situation that required resolution through means other than noble sentiment. The brief confrontation that followed their competing offers of self-sacrifice revealed depth of mutual respect that existed beneath their constant bickering, recognition that both would gladly die for causes that mattered more than individual survival. The decision that ultimately emerged preserved both their honor and their practical effectiveness. Zoro's superior physical resilience making him better suited for enduring trauma that would have killed anyone else, while allowing Sanji to continue protecting their sleeping crewmates from dangers that might still emerge. The wound to his side that enabled him to defeat the cook without permanent damage demonstrated tactical thinking that served larger purposes while respecting the genuine nobility of his rival's intentions. The forest clearing where Zoro chose to face his fate provided setting that seemed appropriate for confrontation with forces that transcended normal human experience, the isolation ensuring that whatever happened would not endanger others, while offering natural cathedral worthy of what might prove to be his final moments. The silence that surrounded him as he approached the massive pour of accumulated suffering created atmosphere of solemnity that transformed practical necessity into something approaching ritual observance. The absorption of Luffy's pain proved to be experience that challenged every assumption he had developed about the relationship between physical and psychological suffering, waves of agony that went beyond mere sensation to encompass emotional trauma that had been compressed into pure essence. Each moment of endurance required active choice to continue bearing burden that seemed designed to break anyone foolish enough to attempt carrying it. Torture that made every previous injury seem insignificant by comparison. Yet, throughout the ordeal that threatened to tear apart both body and spirit, Zoro's commitment to protecting Luffy never wavered, his understanding that this was what loyalty actually required, providing strength that transcended normal human limitations. The knowledge that his suffering served purpose larger than himself transformed what might have been meaningless torture into meaningful sacrifice, pain that honored bonds too precious to be broken by any external force. Sanji's discovery of him hours later, covered in blood but still conscious, created moment of recognition between warriors who understood what devotion actually meant when stripped of sentiment and reduced to pure action. The cook's question about what had happened received answer that would become legendary among those who understood the true meaning of loyalty. Nothing had happened, because admitting to suffering would have diminished the significance of choice he had made. The simple phrase, "nothing happened," carried weight that went far beyond mere denial or stoicism to encompass complete commitment to protecting not just Luffy's body, but his peace of mind, ensuring that their captain would never have to carry guilt for pain that others had chosen to bear on his behalf. The lie that preserved psychological as well as physical well-being demonstrated understanding of leadership's burdens that went beyond tactical consideration to encompass emotional protection of those whose dreams required such careful tending. The 2 days that followed tested Chopper's medical skills while providing time for reflection on what their encounter with Kuma had revealed about the challenges that awaited them in waters ahead. The injuries that covered Zoro's body served as physical reminder of prices that loyalty demanded, wounds that would heal, but whose memory would continue to influence every subsequent decision about what risks were worth taking for causes that mattered. Brook's eventual recruitment, added musician they had sought since leaving Water 7, while providing living connection to promises that transcended death itself. His agreement to join their crew, creating bonds between past and future that would influence adventures yet to come. The skeleton's determination to keep faith with Laboon demonstrated that some commitments survived every test that time and circumstance could devise. Loyalty that made their own dedication seem less exceptional and more natural expression of values that connected all who understood what friendship truly meant. The departure from Thriller Bark carried them toward challenges that would make their encounter with Moria seem like preparation rather than climax. Their survival of Kuma's test providing confidence that bonds forged through genuine sacrifice could withstand pressures that would destroy partnerships based on lesser foundations. The Grand Line continued to demand growth that pushed them beyond every previous limitation, but they faced the unknown future secure in knowledge that some connections were stronger than any force the world could bring to bear against them. The chaos that erupted at Sabaody Archipelago marked the end of one chapter in Roronoa Zoro's journey and the beginning of trials that would test not just his individual strength, but his understanding of what it truly meant to serve as protector for those whose dreams demanded such careful tending. The mangrove groves that had seemed like paradise compared to Thriller-Bark's supernatural horrors transformed into nightmare of separation and helplessness. Each member of their family scattered to destinations unknown while he stood powerless to prevent the dissolution of bonds that had seemed unbreakable just hours before. Bartholomew Kuma's systematic elimination of his crewmates created wounds that went deeper than any physical injury he had ever endured, each disappearance feeling like amputation of limbs that had become essential to his functioning as both warrior and person. The pore-shaped bubbles that carried away his nakama dissolved connections that had given meaning to every battle he had fought since leaving Shimotsuki village, leaving him alone with failures too massive to be processed by normal psychological mechanisms designed for manageable disappointments rather than existential collapse. The transportation to Kuraigana Island came without warning or preparation, his consciousness returning to find himself in ruins that seemed designed to reflect the devastation that had been wrought upon his carefully constructed world. The Gothic architecture that surrounded him spoke of grandeur that had long since faded into decay, stone walls that had once housed civilization, now serving as monuments to the inevitable entropy that claimed all human ambitions when time and circumstance aligned against them. Perona's presence in this desolate place provided companionship that was equal parts annoying and necessary. The Ghost Princess's complaints about her own exile, creating constant reminder that he was not alone in having his plans disrupted by forces beyond his control. Her hollow fruit abilities had made her formidable opponent during their brief encounter on Thriller Bark. Yet here she seemed more like fellow prisoner than enemy, someone whose circumstances paralleled his own, in ways that made mutual assistance logical, if not particularly pleasant. The revelation that Dracul Mihawk considered Kuraigana Island his home transformed exile into opportunity so perfect that it seemed like intervention by fate itself. The world's greatest swordsman's residence providing access to instruction that no amount of independent training could have replicated. Yet the humiliation of being dependent upon someone he intended to eventually challenge created psychological tensions that made every moment of potential learning into reminder of current inadequacy. Mihawk's casual dismissal of his presence demonstrated gap between aspiration and reality that made their previous encounter at Barati seem like gentle introduction to themes that would dominate the next phase of his development. The warlord's assumption that someone incapable of defeating the island's human drills could not possibly warrant serious attention revealed standards of competence that made Zoro's previous achievements seem like childhood games rather than genuine progress toward meaningful strength. The human drills themselves provided opponents whose mimicry of combat techniques created fighting experiences unlike anything he had previously encountered, their ability to copy and adapt to new approaches forcing constant innovation in tactics that had previously served him well. The baboon's imitative nature meant that every technique he employed became weapon in their arsenal, creating escalating complexity that demanded growth not just in power, but in strategic thinking that could outmaneuver opponents who learned from every exchange. The weeks of solitary combat against creatures whose intelligence allowed them to study his weaknesses while adapting their own approaches provided training regimen more brutal and effective than any formal instruction could have devised. Each battle tested not just his technical skills but his capacity for innovation under pressure, forcing development of new techniques while simultaneously requiring mastery of fundamentals that had been neglected in favor of flashier applications of three-sword style. The isolation that accompanied this training proved almost as challenging as the physical demands, months passing without meaningful human conversation while he struggled to maintain focus on goals that seemed increasingly distant from his immediate reality. The absence of his crewmates created void that could not be filled through combat or meditation, emotional emptiness that made every victory feel hollow, despite the genuine progress such achievements represented. Perona's reluctant assistance in tending his wounds provided human contact that was essential for maintaining psychological stability. Her complaints about being stuck with someone whose social skills made him unsuitable company, creating familiar rhythm that substituted for the banter he had shared with his nakama. Her ghost powers proved surprisingly useful for reconnaissance and tactical support, abilities that complemented his direct approach while providing perspectives he could never achieve through individual effort alone. The newspaper that brought news of Marineford's war provided context that transformed his exile from mere inconvenience into desperate race against time. Luffy's involvement in conflict of such magnitude creating urgency that made every moment of training feel simultaneously essential and insufficient. The images of his captain facing powers that dwarfed anything they had previously encountered made clear that reunion would require growth that exceeded every previous standard he had set for himself. The revelation that Ace had died protecting Luffy struck like physical blow. The loss of someone who had represented everything admirable about the older brother archetype, creating grief that competed with his own sense of inadequacy at being absent when his captain needed him most. The knowledge that Luffy was suffering alone while he remained trapped on distant island by his own limitations added layers of motivation that transformed training from personal development into sacred obligation. Mihawk's eventual agreement to provide instruction came only after Zoro had demonstrated worthiness through accomplishments that went beyond mere combat effectiveness to encompass understanding of what such teaching would actually require. The warlord's recognition that someone willing to set aside pride in service of protecting others might deserve guidance represented acknowledgement that strength without proper purpose remained meaningless, regardless of its protecting others. Magnitude. The training that followed pushed every aspect of his development beyond limits he had believed absolute. Techniques that had seemed adequate for Grand Line adventures proving insufficient for challenges that awaited in New World waters, where even basic survival required capabilities he had never needed to develop. The fundamentals of swordsmanship that he had believed mastered revealed depths of complexity that made his previous understanding seem shallow by comparison. Haki instruction provided access to powers that operated according to principles completely different from anything he had previously studied. The three forms of spiritual energy, requiring mental discipline that went far beyond physical training to encompass meditation and self-awareness that challenged every assumption he had developed about the relationship between warrior and weapon. Busoshoku Haki transformed his swords into instruments capable of cutting through substances that had previously been impervious to physical force, while Kenbun Shoku allowed perception of attacks before they were launched. The development of these abilities required abandonment of fighting instincts that had been honed through years of experience, replacement of reactive responses with proactive techniques that demanded prediction, rather than mere response to threats as they materialized. The process felt like learning to fight all over again, muscle memory that had been built through countless battles becoming liability rather than asset when applied to combat that operated according to new rules. Mihawk's philosophical instruction proved as valuable as his technical guidance, the world's greatest swordsman's understanding of what separated true masters from merely skilled practitioners, providing framework for development that went beyond accumulation of techniques to encompass transformation of character itself. His lessons about cutting only what needed to be cut while protecting what deserved preservation required judgment that could only come through wisdom rather than mere strength. The meditation practices that accompanied physical training created mental discipline that had been completely absent from his previous development. The ability to achieve states of complete focus while maintaining awareness of broader tactical situations proving essential for techniques that required split-second timing, combined with strategic thinking. The stillness that such practices demanded seemed to contradict his naturally aggressive fighting style, yet proved to enhance rather than limit his effectiveness when properly integrated. The gradual mastery of advanced applications allowed him to understand how little he had actually accomplished during his pre-time skip adventures. Recognition that what had seemed like impressive growth had been merely foundation laying for development that was only now beginning to achieve its potential. The techniques that emerged from proper instruction bore little resemblance to his previous approaches, refinement that made every previous victory seem like accident rather than achievement. Perona's constant commentary on his progress provided outside perspective that was essential for maintaining realistic assessment of his development. Her observations about his limitations serving as necessary checks on confidence that might otherwise have grown beyond what his actual abilities could support. Her willingness to point out failures and setbacks created accountability that solitary training could never have provided. The anniversary of Ace's death provided darkest moment of the entire training period, grief that had been temporarily suppressed by demands of constant improvement, resurging with full force when external distractions were absent. The recognition that nothing he accomplished could undo that loss or ease his captain's suffering created emotional crisis that threatened to undermine everything he had achieved through months of dedicated effort. Yet it was through confronting this darkness that he finally understood what his training was truly meant to accomplish. Recognition that becoming stronger was not about erasing past failures, but about ensuring that future losses would not occur through his inadequacy. The promise he had made to never lose again took on new meaning when viewed through lens of responsibility rather than mere personal ambition. The final months of instruction focused on integration rather than acquisition, the refinement of abilities he had developed into coherent fighting style that could function under conditions of extreme stress while maintaining effectiveness against opponents whose strength exceeded anything he had previously imagined possible. The harmony between different forms of haki and traditional swordsmanship created capabilities that were greater than sum of individual components. Mihawk's final assessment provided validation that 2 years of sacrifice and dedication had achieved their intended purpose. The world's greatest swordsman's satisfaction with his student's progress serving as proof that gap between aspiration and reality had finally begun to narrow. The knowledge that he had learned everything that could be taught created both confidence and responsibility. Recognition that further growth would depend entirely on choices and experiences that lay ahead. The preparation for departure carried emotional weight that neither master nor student fully articulated, their relationship having evolved from mere instruction to something approaching mutual respect despite the vast difference in their current abilities. Mihawk's parting words carried implications about challenges that awaited while suggesting confidence that his former student possessed qualities necessary for facing whatever trials the new world might devise. The reunion with his crewmates at Sabaudi represented not just restoration of bonds that had been severed, but recognition that everyone had grown in ways that complemented each other's development, individual transformation, creating collective capabilities that exceeded what any of them could have achieved through solitary effort. The strength they had gained during separation would only achieve its full potential when channeled through relationships that gave such power, meaning, and purpose. The boy who had been scattered by Kuma's power had returned as someone capable of protecting the people who mattered most, not through abandonment of principles that had always guided him, but through refinement of those principles into forms that could function effectively in a world where even greater challenges awaited. The foundations had been laid for growth that would continue throughout whatever adventures lay ahead, preparation that honored both individual dreams and collective responsibilities that made such dreams worth pursuing. The 2 years of separation had ended, but their true significance would only be revealed through trials yet to come, when strength gained in isolation would be tested through bonds that had been strengthened rather than weakened by temporary division. The path toward becoming world's greatest swordsman remained unchanged, but understanding of what such greatness actually required had evolved to encompass responsibilities that went far beyond individual achievement, to include protection of dreams that belonged to everyone who had chosen to trust him with their safety and their hopes for the future. The return to Sabaudi Archipelago carried with it the weight of transformation that went far beyond mere physical improvement. Each member of the reunited Straw Hat crew bearing changes that reflected 2 years of growth achieved through trials that had tested not just their individual capabilities, but their fundamental understanding of what it meant to pursue dreams in a world that seemed designed to crush such aspirations. For Roronoa Zoro, the mangrove groves that had once witnessed their devastating defeat now served as stage for demonstrating evolution that made their previous strength seem like childhood games compared to the power they now commanded. The fake Straw Hats who had gathered to capitalize on their reputation provided perfect opportunity to showcase the gap that had developed between appearance and reality, their crude attempts at mimicry, revealing how legendary their actual crew had become during their absence from the world's attention. Zoro's effortless dispatch of the pretenders with nothing more than the unconscious emanation of Conqueror's haki announced his return not just to scattered crewmates, but to every marine, pirate, and bounty hunter who might have thought 2 years of separation had weakened bonds that were in fact stronger than ever. The reunion itself carried emotional weight that none of them had fully anticipated, recognition that while their individual growth had been essential, it was only through restoration of their connections that such development could achieve its true potential. The strength each had gained during isolation would prove meaningful only when channeled through relationships that gave power purpose beyond mere accumulation of capability, bonds that transformed individual achievement into collective force, capable of challenging the established order itself. Fishman Island's approach required submission to depths that had once seemed impossible for surface dwellers to survive, their coated ship descending through waters where pressure and darkness created an environment hostile to human life, yet necessary for reaching destinations that lay beyond conventional navigation. The journey downward served as metaphor for their willingness to venture into realms where normal rules no longer applied, places where survival demanded adaptation to conditions that had destroyed countless others who lacked sufficient preparation or determination. The underwater kingdom that awaited them defied every assumption about what was possible 10,000 meters below the surface. Ryugu Palace and its surrounding cities creating civilization that thrived in conditions that should have made complex society impossible. The artificial sun that provided illumination demonstrated triumph of engineering over environmental limitation, proof that determination could create beauty in places where none should have been able to exist, technology that served life rather than merely accumulating power for its own sake. Yet it was the discrimination that had shaped Fishman Island's history that provided their first real encounter with systemic oppression that went beyond individual villainy to encompass entire societies built upon assumptions of racial superiority that poisoned relationships between species for generations. The segregation between fishmen and humans had created wounds that festered across centuries, each side nursing grievances that justified further hatred in endless cycles of retribution that served no constructive purpose while perpetuating suffering for all involved. Hody Jones and the new Fishman pirates represented everything toxic about pride when it curdled into supremacist ideology, their leaders' consumption of energy steroids serving as metaphor for the way anger could provide temporary strength, while ultimately destroying those who relied upon hatred as their primary source of power. His philosophy that fishmen were inherently superior to humans had transformed legitimate grievances about historical injustice into justification for genocide that would have eliminated any possibility of peaceful coexistence. The battle that erupted throughout Fishman Island tested not just their individual combat abilities, but their capacity to protect innocent populations while simultaneously fighting enemies whose strength had been artificially enhanced beyond natural limitations. Zoro's role in the conflict demonstrated how completely his training under Mihawk had transformed his approach to combat. Techniques that had once required significant effort, now deployed with casual ease, that made his previous struggles seem like distant memories. His effortless defeat of Huzo, the octopus fishman whose reputation as swordsman had made him legendary throughout the underwater kingdom, provided measurement of growth that could be quantified through direct comparison with opponents whose abilities had not changed during the interim. The battle lasted only moments, Zoro's new techniques proving so superior to his previous capabilities that enemies who might once have challenged him were now dispatched without requiring serious effort or attention. Yet it was not the ease of victory that marked his true development, but rather the restraint he demonstrated in achieving it, his ability to defeat opponents without inflicting unnecessary damage, revealing understanding of strength that went beyond mere accumulation of power to encompass wisdom about when and how such capabilities should be employed. The philosophy that Mihawk had taught about cutting only what needed to be cut while protecting what deserved preservation had been integrated into fighting style that served protection rather than mere dominance. Princess Shirahoshi's revelation as Poseidon, one of the ancient weapons, carried implications that stretched far beyond Fishman Island's immediate concerns. Her power to command sea kings representing force that could reshape entire oceans if properly directed. Her innocence and gentleness provided stark contrast to the destructive potential she embodied, raising questions about whether such power could ever be wielded without corruption, whether strength of such magnitude inevitably transformed those who possessed it regardless of their original intentions. The departure from Fishman Island marked more than mere continuation of their journey toward the New World, but represented acceptance of responsibilities that went far beyond personal adventure to encompass protection of entire nations and peoples. Luffy's declaration that Fishman Island was under his protection served notice to the world that his ambitions had evolved beyond individual achievement to encompass obligations that could affect the fate of millions who would never meet him, but whose lives would be shaped by decisions he made. Punk Hazard's appearance on their log pose as destination that should not have existed suggested experiments that had gone beyond scientific curiosity to embrace wholesale manipulation of environmental systems that defied natural law. The island split between fire and ice, represented triumph of human ambition over natural balance. Laboratory conditions that treated entire landmasses as testing grounds for theories that normal ethical constraints would have prevented from being implemented. Caesar Clown's experiments on children represented evil that was particularly repugnant to someone whose own development had been shaped by adults who, however harsh their methods, had ultimately acted in his best interests. The sight of innocent victims suffering withdrawal from drugs administered under guise of medical treatment triggered protective instincts that had been honed through years of defending those who could not defend themselves. Moral outrage that transformed tactical consideration into personal mission. The alliance with Trafalgar Law marked first time any of them had agreed to subordinate immediate impulses to longer-term strategic planning. The surgeon's proposal to target one of the four emperors, requiring patience and coordination that had once been foreign to their nature. The plan that emerged combined Law's calculating intelligence with their crew's innovative approach to problem-solving in ways that created possibilities neither could have achieved through individual effort alone. Dressrosa's corruption ran deeper than simple criminal conspiracy. Doflamingo's string-based powers serving as metaphor for ways that manipulation could transform citizens into puppets who performed according to scripts they had never consciously chosen to follow. The toys that populated his kingdom were not whimsical decorations but former humans whose memories had been erased from the minds of those who had once loved them. Systematic elimination of inconvenient people disguised as entertainment for those who remained. The Corridor Coliseum provided their first opportunity to compete for prize that carried emotional weight beyond its practical value. Ace's devil fruit representing not just power but connection to brother whose sacrifice continued to motivate every choice they made. The tournament that would determine the fruit's new owner brought together warriors whose strength reflected elevated standards that prevailed in New World waters. Combatants who would have been legendary in East Blue, reduced to preliminary contestants in competition of such magnitude. Sabo's revelation created emotional earthquake that overshadowed even the physical destruction occurring throughout Dressrosa, the brother they had mourned for 13 years, revealing himself to be not just alive but grown into someone whose strength matched his revolutionary ideals. The tears that flowed during their reunion spoke to grief that had shaped all their characters, loss that had been transformed into determination to prevent similar tragedies from occurring to others who deserved protection from world's casual cruelty. The formation of alliances with former enemies demonstrated how their influence could transform adversaries into friends through simple expedient of treating them with respect rather than condescension. Gladiators who had competed against them in Colosseum, becoming comrades whose loyalty was earned through shared combat rather than demanded through fear or obligation. Their ability to inspire cooperation among those who had previously been manipulated into conflict revealed leadership qualities that went beyond individual strength to encompass understanding of what motivated people to risk everything for causes larger than themselves. Zoro's battle with Pika tested abilities that had been developing since his training under Mihawk, the executive officer's stone fruit, creating tactical challenges that required not just power, but precision and strategic thinking that could outmaneuver opponents whose defenses seemed impregnable. The victory that emerged demonstrated mastery of techniques that could cut through substances previously considered impossible to damage, Haki-enhanced attacks that operated according to principles he was still learning to fully control. The climactic moment when he bisected Pika's massive stone form with Ichidai Sanzen Daisen Sakai provided demonstration of growth that could be measured against his previous limitations. Technique that combined everything he had learned about swordsmanship with spiritual energy that transformed physical attacks into something approaching supernatural force. The ease with which he accomplished feat that would have been impossible before his training revealed gap between his current abilities and previous limitations that made earlier struggles seem insignificant by comparison. Yet it was his declaration that there was nothing in the world he could not cut that carried the greatest significance. Statement that went beyond mere boasting to encompass philosophical understanding of what mastery actually meant when properly achieved. The confidence that underlay such words came not from arrogance, but from integration of technique and purpose that made impossible seem inevitable when sufficient will was applied to proper methods. The birdcage that Doflamingo deployed as his final gambit created situation where individual strength had to be channeled through collective effort. Zoro's attempts to hold back the shrinking prison, requiring assistance from allies who understood that some challenges could only be overcome through cooperation that transcended individual capability. His willingness to risk everything in attempt to buy time for Luffy's recovery demonstrated understanding of leadership that went beyond mere following orders to encompass independent judgment about when sacrifice was necessary for greater good. The formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet occurred despite Luffy's protests rather than because of his planning. 7 crews of powerful pirates voluntarily subordinating themselves to someone whose refusal to accept formal authority only made him more worthy of loyalty they offered. The sake ceremony that formalized their alliance created bonds that would endure across whatever distances might separate them in years to come, network of support that transformed individual crew into movement capable of challenging established order on multiple fronts simultaneously. Zoo's revelation that road poneglyphs held key to reaching Laugh-Tale provided concrete direction for dreams that had previously been guided by intuition and determination alone. Ancient stones scattered across world containing information that had been preserved for centuries by those who understood its value, even when they could not act upon it themselves. The knowledge that only 4 such stones existed transformed their quest from vague aspiration into specific challenge, with measurable objectives and clearly defined requirements for success. The alliance with Mink Tribe added another layer to growing coalition that seemed to form naturally around their presence. Nekomamushi and Inuarashi's decision to support their quest representing judgment by beings whose lifespans provided perspective on historical patterns that most humans could not perceive. Their knowledge of Void Century carried implications that reached far beyond pirate adventures to encompass secrets that world government had spent 800 years trying to suppress through methods that included genocide of entire populations. The preparation for confronting Kaido required strategic thinking that went beyond anything they had previously undertaken, coordination of multiple crews and factions demanding skills that had never been part of their natural repertoire, the transformation from impulsive teenagers to people capable of inspiring and coordinating complex military operations represented growth that could not be measured in terms of physical power alone, but encompassed development of wisdom that made such power effective when properly applied. Big Mom's pursuit for perceived slights to her dignity demonstrated how actions of individual pirates could trigger responses that affected entire regions. Her rage at being denied wedding. She had planned creating chaos that spread across multiple islands, while serving as reminder that power without wisdom could be as dangerous to its possessor as to anyone else. The Emperor's tantrum revealed that even those who had achieved ultimate success could still be controlled by emotions that made them vulnerable to manipulation by cleverer opponents. The infiltration of Whole Cake Island marked their first direct confrontation with Emperor on her own territory, rescue of Sanji requiring them to operate according to principles of stealth and misdirection that contradicted every instinct they had developed during years of straightforward combat. The success of their escape owed more to preparation and cooperation than to individual strength. demonstrating how much their approach to problem-solving had matured since early days when direct assault seemed like answer to every challenge. As they sailed away from Whole Cake Island with their crew restored and bonds stronger than ever, they carried with them understanding that had been earned through trials that tested every aspect of their development, while pointing toward challenges that would make everything they had previously faced seem like preparation rather than culmination. The new world had accepted them as legitimate contenders in greatest game ever played, recognition that came with responsibilities as much as opportunities. The designation as Fifth Emperor felt both premature and inevitable, acknowledgement of potential that had not yet been fully realized, but which seemed destined to reshape world, according to principles that valued freedom over security, friendship over power, dreams over acceptance of limiting reality. The boy who had once declared intention to become world's greatest swordsman was beginning to understand that such individual goals could only be achieved through service to causes that elevated everyone they touched, strength that served protection, rather than mere accumulation of personal capability. The horizons that beckoned promised adventures that would test every lesson learned while demanding growth that would transform them from talented individuals into force of nature, capable of challenging systems that had seemed permanent. Since their establishment centuries earlier, they sailed forward, not just as pirates seeking treasure, but as family bound by experiences that had proven their connection stronger than any obstacle world might place before them, ready to prove that some bonds transcended even legendary dangers that awaited in waters ahead. The arrival at Zoo transformed their understanding of what was possible in a world where the impossible had become routine, the ancient elephant carrying entire civilization upon its back, serving as living proof that some legends were founded in reality rather than imagination. Zunesha's millennia-long journey across the oceans represented punishment for crimes so ancient that their nature had been forgotten by all except those who bore responsibility for remembering. The elephant's eternal wandering, serving as both penance and preservation of knowledge that the world had tried to erase through systematic elimination of those who possessed inconvenient truths. The climb up the massive leg that served as pathway to the kingdom above tested not just their physical endurance but their faith in possibilities that seemed to defy natural law, each step upward, carrying them farther from familiar concepts of what constituted solid ground, while approaching civilization that existed according to principles they had never encountered. The dragon that Kinemon conjured to assist their ascent demonstrated abilities that went beyond mere artistry to encompass creation of temporary life, techniques that suggested connections between will and reality that most people could never hope to understand. The mink tribe's welcome proved unlike anything they had experienced in their travels, hospitality that transcended species barriers to embrace visitors as family members whose arrival had been anticipated rather than merely hoped for. The electro abilities that each mink possessed naturally created what should have been insurmountable tactical challenges for enemies. Yet these same powers were deployed in service of celebration and joy rather than conquest or domination, strength that served community rather than individual advancement. Nekomamushi and Inuarashi's ancient feud revealed ways that personal conflicts could poison entire communities when those involved possessed sufficient authority to force others to choose sides in battles that predated most of their subjects' births. The alternating day and night rulership that had emerged from their inability to coexist demonstrated both creative, problem-solving, and fundamental dysfunction that resulted when pride prevented rational resolution of solvable problems, leadership that served ego rather than responsibility to those who depended upon their guidance. The revelation that Jack had devastated Zu in search of samurai from Wano provided first glimpse of the kind of casual cruelty that defined Kaido's approach to governance, the beast pirates' willingness to torture entire populations for information that could have been obtained through less destructive means, revealing philosophy that treated suffering as entertainment rather than regrettable necessity. The drought's use of poison gas against civilians demonstrated how completely the Emperor's forces had abandoned any pretense of honor in pursuit of objectives that served only their master's ambitions. Yet it was the mink's protection of Rizzo, despite the agony inflicted upon them, that provided the most powerful demonstration of loyalty Zoro had ever witnessed. Their willingness to endure systematic torture rather than betray someone they had sworn to protect, revealing depths of honor that shamed most human examples of faithfulness. The secret they had guarded at such terrible cost was not strategic information, but simple commitment to keeping promises regardless of prices such fidelity demanded from those brave enough to maintain their word. The road poneglyph, hidden within Zu's whale tree, represented more than mere navigational tool. It was key to understanding how the Pirate King had reached the final island where whatever Joy Boy had left behind continued to wait for someone worthy of receiving it. The ancient stone's message, deciphered by Robin's hard-won expertise, provided concrete direction for dreams that had previously been guided by intuition alone, transforming vague aspiration into specific quest with measurable objectives. Inuarashi's explanation of the 4 road poneglyphs scattered across the world created framework for adventures that would test every skill they had developed, while forcing confrontation with powers that had shaped global politics for generations. The knowledge that Kaido and Big Mom each possessed one of the essential stones transformed their eventual conflicts with these emperors from simple battles into necessary steps toward achieving dreams that had seemed impossible when first articulated in East Blue taverns. The revelation of Momonosuke's true identity as heir to Wano's shogunate provided context that transformed their alliance with the samurai from mere cooperation into participation in restoration of legitimate government that had been usurped through treachery and foreign intervention. The boys' devil fruit powers, artificial though they might be, demonstrated that even incomplete attempts at recreating natural abilities could produce results that exceeded normal human limitations when wielded by someone with proper motivation. Pedro's sacrifice during their eventual departure from Zu would demonstrate depths of commitment that their dreams could inspire in those who understood their significance. The jaguar mink choosing death over failure in mathematics that made perfect sense to someone who comprehended what was at stake. His final explosion was not desperate act but calculated decision, trading one life for many in equation that honored both his own people's traditions and the cause he had chosen to support above personal survival. The preparation for Whole Cake Island began not as invasion but as rescue mission. Sanji's forced departure, creating emotional wounds that could only be healed through direct confrontation with family that had shaped his childhood through systematic cruelty disguised as education. The Vinsmoke name carried weight throughout North Blue that was built upon reputation for efficiency in warfare, their scientific approach to human enhancement, creating soldiers who possessed overwhelming power while lacking emotional capacity that made such strength dangerous to wield responsibly. Zoro's decision to trust in the separation required by their dual missions, his own path toward Wano, while others pursued their cook's recovery, demonstrated growth in his understanding of leadership and delegation that went far beyond his previous approach to problem solving. The recognition that some challenges required division of their forces rather than collective action showed evolution from someone who preferred straightforward solutions to person, capable of strategic thinking that served larger purposes. Big Mom's territory represented power on scale that dwarfed anything they had previously encountered. Emperor, whose influence extended across dozens of islands, and whose authority was enforced not just through personal strength, but through network of children and subordinates, whose loyalty was secured through combinations of fear and beli, genuine affection. The anthropomorphic objects that populated her domain were not merely decorative but represented souls of those who had failed to meet their obligations, consciousness imprisoned in inanimate forms as eternal reminder of what happened to those who disappointed her. The wedding that served as cover for infiltration was more than ceremony, but political alliance designed to consolidate power that could challenge world government's authority. Union between Sanji and Pudding representing merger of technologies and territories that would create capabilities no single faction could achieve alone. The assassination plot that emerged during ceremony demonstrated how quickly celebrations could transform into battlefields when different factions possessed conflicting definitions of success. Sanji's internal conflict between loyalty to crew and desire to protect Barati from his family's threatened retaliation revealed psychological scars that abusive childhoods could create. Self-worth damaged in ways that made accepting help feel like imposing burden on others, rather than receiving support that friends gladly provided. His eventual decision to trust in their strength rather than sacrificing himself for supposed protection marked crucial growth in understanding of what family relationships were supposed to provide. The confrontation with Katakuri in Mirror World became more than just battle between opponents, but philosophical dialogue conducted through violence, each fighter's technique revealing aspects of character that words could never adequately express. The Sweet Commander's perfection was both strength and weakness. His reputation for invincibility, creating pressure that prevented him from acknowledging flaws that made him more rather than less human. Limitations that created connection with opponents who possessed courage to acknowledge their own imperfections. The escape from Whole Cake Island required cooperation on scale that transformed individual abilities into collective force capable of challenging Emperor's authority on her own territory, each crew member's contribution proving essential to survival rather than merely helpful to success. The Thousand Sunnies modifications that Frankie had incorporated during their time skip proved crucial for dealing with threats that conventional ship design could never have anticipated. Preparation that demonstrated how completely their adventures had changed their understanding of what was necessary for survival. The Sun Pirates' intervention during Final Escape demonstrated how their influence could inspire loyalty in those who had never sworn allegiance to them. Jinbei's former crew choosing to risk their lives for pirates they barely knew, because their former captain's judgment was sufficient endorsement of their worthiness. The sacrifice they made in holding back Big Mom's pursuit bought time that could not have been purchased through any other currency, proving that some debts could only be repaid through blood and determination. The declaration that Fishman Island was under their protection had consequences that extended far beyond symbolic gesture, marking territory in waters that had previously been considered neutral or under Big Mom's indirect influence. The challenge this represented to established order was not lost on other emperors, each recognizing that allowing such claims to stand unchallenged would invite similar encroachments on their own spheres of influence, escalation that could destabilize entire system of power that had maintained relative stability for decades. The approach to Wano country represented culmination of plans that had been developing since their alliance with Law, coordination of multiple factions, whose cooperation was essential for challenging Kaido's authority, requiring diplomatic skills that went far beyond their natural inclinations toward direct action. The closed borders that had isolated the country for centuries meant that information about conditions there was limited and potentially outdated, forcing them to prepare for scenarios they could not fully anticipate while trusting in allies whose capabilities remained largely theoretical. The revelation that Momonosuke was actually son of Kozuki Oden rather than Kinemon transformed their understanding of political situation they were entering. Legitimate heir to Wano's shogunate, representing symbol that could inspire resistance among those who had accepted Orochi's rule as inevitable rather than temporary imposition of foreign power. His devil fruit abilities that allowed transformation into dragon form created both opportunities and complications for their planned rebellion, power that marked him as target while providing capabilities essential for their success. The alliance between Kaido and Big Mom that emerged just before their assault on Onigashima represented worst-case scenario that their planning had considered but hoped to avoid. Two emperors combining forces, creating opposition that exceeded anything they had previously faced while demonstrating how quickly political situations could evolve in directions that made careful preparation meaningless. The temporary nature of such cooperation provided hope that differences between allies could be exploited, but their immediate strength was overwhelming enough to threaten everyone involved in resistance. The fire festival that would serve as cover for their assault represented celebration of traditions that Orochi had tried to suppress, lighting of lanterns carrying wishes that had been deferred for 20 years while their authors waited for circumstances that would make fulfillment possible. The symbolism of launching their rebellion during such observance added weight to their cause that went beyond mere military strategy to encompass cultural restoration that honored both past and future. Zoro's role in preparing for what would become greatest battle of their lives required every alliance they had forged, every skill they had developed, every bond they had strengthened through years of shared adventure and mutual sacrifice. The samurai, who had waited 2 decades for opportunity to reclaim their country, brought dedication that matched their determination, while minks who had suffered under Jack's occupation possessed motivation that transcended mere alliance to encompass personal vengeance for atrocities that had been committed against their people. The coordination required for their assault on Onigashima tested leadership abilities that none of them had needed to develop during their previous adventures. Transformation from small crew whose members could communicate through glances into commanders of forces that numbered in thousands, requiring skills that went beyond individual combat effectiveness to encompass understanding of logistics, communication, and morale that kept large organizations functioning under extreme pressure. The knowledge that their success would determine fate not just of Wano, but of everyone who had chosen to trust in their cause, added weight to every decision they made during final preparations. Recognition that failure would result in consequences that extended far beyond their own deaths to encompass systematic elimination of everyone who had supported their rebellion. The responsibility they carried made personal concerns seem insignificant compared to obligations they owed to those whose hopes they had chosen to carry forward. As they sailed toward Onigashima with allied forces that represented largest coalition ever assembled under their indirect leadership, Zoro understood that everything they had experienced since leaving East Blue had been preparation for challenges that would test every aspect of their growth while determining whether dreams could survive contact with enemies whose power had shaped world for decades. The battle ahead would prove whether their preparation had been sufficient or whether some obstacles remained too large for even strongest will to overcome through determination alone. The boy who had promised dying friend that one of them would become world's greatest swordsman was preparing to face trials that would test not just his individual strength, but his understanding of what such greatness actually meant when properly achieved. The path toward his goal had led him through adventures that seemed impossible when first undertaken. Yet everything they had accomplished seemed small compared to what lay ahead in waters where legends would be made or broken based on choices they would make in moments when such decisions carried weight that could reshape entire world. according to principles they had chosen to embrace. The year 2020 marked the beginning of what history would remember as the greatest battle ever fought on the seas, a conflict that would determine not just the fate of Wano country, but the very trajectory of the world itself. As the fire festival began across the isolated nation, casting dancing shadows through streets where citizens celebrated in ignorant bliss of the war about to unfold above their heads, Roronoa Zoro prepared to face his greatest challenge yet, while carrying the weight of countless promises pressed upon his shoulders like armor forged from the hopes of everyone who had suffered under Kaido's tyrannical rule. The approach to Onigashima carried with it electricity that seemed to charge the very air around the assembled fleet, ships of the ninja pirate Mink Samurai Alliance. Cutting through waves with purpose that had been 20 years in the making, Zoro stood among warriors whose dedication had been tempered by decades of waiting, their combined desire for liberation, creating atmosphere so thick with anticipation that it seemed to vibrate with potential energy, waiting to be unleashed against enemies who had grown comfortable in their assumption of permanent dominance. The skull-shaped fortress that loomed ahead like monument to despair had been designed to intimidate those who might dare challenge the beast pirate's supremacy, its Gothic architecture serving as psychological warfare that declared the futility of resistance against power that had reshaped entire nations according to one man's vision of order. Yet where others might have seen impenetrable stronghold, Zoro saw only another obstacle between him and the protection of people who had entrusted their dreams to his blade. Stone walls that would fall like all barriers when confronted by will that refused to accept defeat as possibility. The initial assault erupted in chaos that would have overwhelmed forces lacking the unity that had been forged through shared suffering and mutual commitment to causes larger than individual survival. Zoro moved through the battlefield like force of nature, whose every action served purposes that went beyond mere combat to encompass protection of bonds that had become more precious than life itself. His swords singing through air with harmony that spoke of technique refined through years of preparation for exactly this moment of ultimate testing. As battle raged across multiple fronts, each more desperate than the last, Zoro's strategic understanding began to assert itself in ways that would have surprised those who mistook his straightforward approach for lack of tactical sophistication. He recognized instinctively that this was not war that could be won through brute force alone, but required coordination of hearts and minds, united in pursuit of future that honored both individual dreams and collective responsibilities that made such dreams worth achieving. The journey through Onigashima's labyrinthine interior became a gauntlet that tested every aspect of his growth as both fighter and guardian. Each floor climbed representing not just physical progress toward Kaido, but stepped deeper into understanding of what it truly meant to serve as protector of something greater than himself. The beast pirates he encountered along the way served as measurements against which he could gauge how far he had traveled from those early days when simple survival had seemed like adequate goal for someone with nothing but determination and inherited swords. The roof of the Skull Dome presented him with confrontation that exceeded every previous challenge he had faced, 2 of the 4 emperors of the sea standing before him as obstacles to his crew's freedom and his captain's happiness. The rational part of any other person's mind might have counseled retreat, suggested finding different approach, or at least waiting for more favorable odds. But Zoro had never been rational in conventional sense. His logic was logic of the heart, which insisted that some things were worth any risk when proper principles were at stake. The battle that followed transcended mere physical combat to become clash of philosophies made manifest through violence that shook the very foundations of the island beneath their feet. Kaido represented old order built upon assumption that might alone determine right, his every attack carrying weight of decades spent crushing dreams and breaking spirits through simple application of overwhelming force that had never encountered resistance. It could not eventually overcome through persistence and superior resources. Against this stood Zoro, whose strength had always derived from something deeper than muscle and bone. His attacks carrying accumulated weight of every person who had ever believed in him, every friend who had trusted him with their dreams, every stranger who had found hope in his unwavering refusal to accept that world could not be improved through application of sufficient determination guided by proper moral compass. When his blades met Kaido's Kanabo, it was freedom itself, striking against tyranny, compassion battling cruelty, future warring against past, that refused to release its stranglehold on present possibilities. The introduction of advanced conquerors' haki into their battle elevated conflict to heights that few beings in world could comprehend, let alone participate in with any hope of survival or meaningful contribution. The sky itself, split above Onigashima as wills, clashed in contests that seemed to encompass not just immediate tactical objectives, but fundamental questions about what kind of world would emerge from their struggle. Heavens torn apart by forces that operated according to principles that transcended normal understanding of cause and effect. Zoro's mastery of this most advanced form of spiritual energy spoke not just to his growing power, but to his evolution as someone worthy of standing beside the future pirate king, his very presence commanding respect and inspiring others to greatness that they had not known they possessed until circumstances demanded such growth from them. The technique that allowed him to coat his attacks with the force of his own will made manifest represented synthesis of everything he had learned about swordsmanship, philosophy, and leadership during years of preparation for exactly this kind of ultimate test. Yet even as he pushed his abilities to their absolute limits, trading blow for earth-shaking blow with beings whose strength had shaped global politics for decades, the true challenge came not in matching their power, but in outlasting their conviction. Both Kaido and Big Mom had grown comfortable in positions as undefeatable forces, finding solace in certainty that no one could challenge their supremacy in any meaningful way, assumptions that had never been tested by opponents who possessed courage to continue fighting regardless of how hopeless circumstances might appear. Zoro's refusal to acknowledge defeat, his ability to rise again and again no matter how devastating the punishment inflicted upon him, began to chip away at that certainty, like waves against cliff face that seemed permanent, until moment when accumulated pressure finally caused structural failure that had been inevitable from the first impact. His persistence in the face of overwhelming opposition represented more than mere stubbornness. It was demonstration of will so pure that it could not be broken by any external force. Determination that drew strength from sources that his enemies could not understand or replicate. The moment when advanced conqueror's haki first manifested through his attacks came not through conscious decision, but through natural evolution of fighting spirit that had finally reached threshold where technique became expression of character rather than mere application of learned skills. The shock that registered in Kaido's eyes as the cut opened across his chest represented recognition that assumptions about power and its distribution had been fundamentally incorrect, that strength could emerge from sources that established order had never needed to consider as legitimate threats. Yet it was the scar that his attack left upon the Emperor's seemingly invulnerable hide that carried the greatest significance, permanent mark, that would serve as reminder that even the strongest creatures could be wounded by those who possessed sufficient determination and proper understanding of what they were fighting to protect. The wound that would never fully heal represented proof that legends could be challenged by those who were willing to risk everything in pursuit of dreams that seemed impossible until moment when they were achieved. King's arrival as Zoro's final opponent provided tests that was perfectly calibrated to challenge every aspect of his development while forcing evolution that could only come through confrontation with enemy who understood his capabilities well enough to exploit weaknesses that he had not even recognized as vulnerabilities. The Lunarian's mastery of fire and flight created tactical challenges that went beyond anything he had previously encountered, abilities that seemed designed specifically to counter the three-sword style that had served him so well against every other opponent. The battle that erupted between them tested not just their combat skills, but their understanding of what it meant to serve as guardian of others' dreams. King's absolute loyalty to Kaido representing twisted mirror of Zoro's own devotion to Luffy and their shared cause. Both fighters possessed strength that had been honed through years of preparation, but their motivations revealed fundamental differences that would ultimately determine the outcome of their confrontation despite apparent equality in raw capability. King's flame-based abilities created an environment where normal swordsmanship techniques proved inadequate. His capacity to manipulate fire and adjust his defensive capabilities based on tactical requirements, forcing innovation in approaches that had served Zoro well throughout his journey. The recognition that his opponent's flames could be extinguished to increase speed while sacrificing defensive power provided key to victory, but only after prolonged observation that tested his patience and analytical skills in ways that pure combat never had. The moment when he finally understood King's limitations and adapted his strategy accordingly represented culmination of everything Mihawk had taught him about the importance of observation and timing in combat that operated at the highest levels. The technique that allowed him to exploit the brief window when his opponent was vulnerable required precision that went beyond mere physical skill to encompass understanding of psychological pressure and its effects on decision-making under extreme stress. The victory that emerged from this understanding was more than simple triumph over powerful enemy. It was proof that growth achieved through proper dedication and training could overcome even seemingly insurmountable advantages when guided by clear purpose and unwavering commitment to principles that transcended individual ambition. His declaration that he would become King of Hell if that was what protecting his captain required represented evolution in his understanding of what strength actually meant when properly applied. Enma's role in his victory revealed the sword's true nature as test of character rather than mere weapon. The blade's demand for massive amounts of haki, forcing him to confront limitations in his spiritual development that he had not fully recognized until circumstances required their acknowledgement. The sword that had once belonged to Odin served as bridge between past and future, connecting his individual growth to larger historical patterns that encompassed generations of warriors who had struggled against the same forces of oppression. The awakening of his conqueror's haki during the battle with King provided final piece of the puzzle that had been developing since his earliest days of training. The recognition that true mastery required not just technical skill but force of personality that could inspire others while intimidating enemies through mere presence. The unconscious beast pirates who fell around him as his power manifested demonstrated that he had finally achieved the kind of spiritual development that separated masters from merely skilled practitioners. Yet it was his response to King's question about his own kingly ambitions that revealed the depth of his character development, his acknowledgement that he must possess such qualities since he had promised his captain and best friend that he would achieve greatness that honored their shared dreams. The recognition that his individual goals could only be achieved through service to causes larger than himself represented maturation that transformed personal ambition into collective responsibility. The final technique that defeated King Kokuju o Santoryu Oji Ichidai Sanzen Daisen Sekai represented synthesis of everything he had learned about swordsmanship, haki, and leadership during years of preparation for exactly this moment of ultimate testing. The attack that simultaneously cut down his opponent while declaring his evolution into someone worthy of the title King of Hell demonstrated power that served protection rather than mere destruction, strength that honored both individual achievement and collective obligations that made such achievement meaningful. The aftermath of victory brought not celebration but collapse, his body finally succumbing to accumulated damage from battles that had pushed every aspect of his development beyond previously established limitations. The unconsciousness that claimed him was not defeat but necessary rest for someone who had given everything in service of dreams that belonged to everyone who had chosen to trust him with their hopes for better future. The encounter with the Grim Reaper figure that appeared during his vulnerable state remained mysterious even after recovery. Supernatural manifestation that seemed to represent either hallucination brought on by extreme stress or genuine supernatural encounter that demonstrated how close he had come to crossing threshold between life and death. The injuries that covered his body upon awakening served as physical testament to prices that ultimate victory demanded from those who were willing to pay them. The week of unconsciousness that followed provided time for healing, while the world processed what had been accomplished on Onigashima. Liberation of Wano, representing more than simple victory over tyranny, but proof that established order could be challenged successfully by those who possessed sufficient courage and proper understanding of what they were fighting to achieve. The celebration that greeted his awakening demonstrated how completely their success had transformed not just political situation, but spiritual atmosphere of entire nation. Yet it was his quiet acknowledgement of Momonosuke's growth into worthy leader that provided the most satisfying aspect of their victory. Recognition that their struggle had not just defeated enemies, but enabled others to achieve their own forms of greatness. The boy who had once trembled with fear had become man capable of shouldering burden of entire nation's future, transformation that validated everything they had risked in pursuit of dreams that had seemed impossible when first articulated. The departure from Wano carried weight that went beyond simple conclusion of successful mission, their impact on the country serving as demonstration of what was possible when individual strength served collective purposes that elevated everyone they touched. The bonds forged through shared struggle would endure regardless of physical distance, connections that had been strengthened rather than weakened by trials that would have destroyed partnerships based on lesser foundations. The recognition that his individual dream of becoming world's greatest swordsman had been advanced through service to causes larger than himself represented understanding that would guide every subsequent decision he made, wisdom that transformed personal ambition into form of leadership that inspired others while remaining true to principles that had always defined his character. The King of Hell who emerged from Wano's liberation was still fundamentally the same person who had made promises to dying friend in village dojo, but his understanding of what those promises required had evolved to encompass responsibilities that went far beyond individual achievement, to include protection of everyone who chose to trust him with their dreams and their lives. The path that began in a small dojo where wooden swords clacked in the morning mist has led us through adventures that transformed a grief-stricken boy into the legendary King of Hell himself. Yet the dream that ignited this journey burns as brightly today as it did in those distant days, when promises were made to a friend who would never see them fulfilled. Roronoa Zoro stands now as the right hand of the future Pirate King, his 3 swords carrying the weight of accumulated victories, and the wisdom earned through defeats that taught him more than triumph ever could. The title of world's greatest swordsman still awaits beyond horizons that promise final confrontation with Mihawk, a meeting that will determine whether the boy, who swore never to lose again, has grown into someone worthy of claiming the greatness that has always been his destination. Yet that individual dream has evolved to encompass responsibilities that go far beyond personal achievement, his strength serving as shield for everyone who has chosen to trust him with their hopes and their lives. The seas ahead will test every lesson learned and every bond forged, but he sails toward those trials carrying promises that transcend even death itself. To Quina, whose memory guides every cut of his blade, to Luffy, whose dreams have become worth any sacrifice, to everyone who believes that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the odds. Rest now, gentle dreamer, and let the eternal promise of adventure carry you toward peaceful sleep, knowing that somewhere on the vast ocean, the King of Hell continues his vigil, 3 swords ready to cut through any darkness that threatens the light of dreams too precious to be extinguished.